And so we ask ourselves, will our actions echo across the centuries?
That's the craziest thing is like in World War I when you watch the documentaries where they'll be like, oh yeah, you know, the war started, so then we all got drafted or we went and joined up, and then our sergeants were teaching us like how to do close order drill, and you're like, these guys don't have any experience either. I think like in World War I for like the US side, there were guys that had like some experience in the Spanish American War, but I listened to a quick thing on that this morning for like a completely unrelated reason. I don't even know how I listened to it. It just popped into my head. And there was like almost no real fighting in the Spanish American War from kind of what I understand. It was just sort of a couple skirmishes. I think at one point there was a bunch of Americans that took over a Spanish camp because the Spaniards had no idea that they were actually at war. The Americans just kind of rolled up, started shooting at
friend.
Oh, yeah, they started shooting at the Spanish. The Spanish were like, "Oh, sorry, we don't have any gunpowder, so we can't return fireworks." Like they thought that it was just a get together, and then the Americans just were like, "All right, well, this is our fort now. You guys have to surrender." And yeah, that's how they learned that they were at war.
I just imagine that exchange, like, "Oh, we don't have any gunpowder for fireworks. We need these for official military." And mid-sentence, the dude just gets bayoneted right through the chest.
Some poor dude just sitting around the fire having a good time. You just get bayoneted through the back. It's like, what just happened?
Drinking Spanish coffees. Have you ever had a Spanish coffee?
I haven't. I'm not a big coffee drinker, but I've heard good things.
Yeah, I will go as far as to say that I personally think that it's better than an Irish coffee, and I think that an Irish coffee is pretty good. I don't know. That's kind of one of the things that the Irish really have outdone most people with is drinking, but I still think that that the Spanish coffee is better. But I don't know. Whatever, doesn't matter. So yeah, I didn't ask you this before, but if you want to introduce yourself, you can. If not, you don't have to.
Oh yeah. So I run the Nigel Harmberry page on Instagram. Not really on anything else. I don't have enough of a how to put it, attention span for any other app. Like I have a Twitter, but I do nothing with it. But yeah, just Nigel Harmberry on Instagram. Experience. Did 5 years in the Marine Corps. Immediately got out and started hanging out with dudes from Wisconsin. But slowly went from just meeting up to training to attending this Force on Force event we did last month.
Cool.
That's pretty much it.
What do you guys have like because it was kind of weird like when we did, so for some background, like we did a Force on Force event last month, about a month ago, and it kind of came out of there was somebody else who was just like, hey, we're gonna be in this area if you want to come hang out, because it was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna be up in that same kind of general region like a week prior if you guys can shift it to the left a week. And then it kind of became a big hodgepodge of guys coming out to attend this. There was you guys and some Canadians and all that stuff that came out. And like we ended up having 3 guys come on sort of last minute to join because I realized that we were very heavily outnumbered. And so I needed some more help.
Yeah. So what happened for us with that, originally it was Woodland Warrior on Instagram. He reached out to me because I had met up with him once or twice, and we were talking about going on a kind of a small hiking trip and getting some training out of it up in the Huron Mountains, where I had hiked about a year prior. And originally we wanted to plan it for sometime between Christmas and New Year's, and we shifted it way to the right towards March. And I'd kind of drafted up some route plans and whatnot for it. And he reaches out to me and he says, hey, these guys are going to be doing a Force on Force event up here. around the same time that we plan on being up there. It's like, would you and your guys be interested in that? And it's like, let me ask, but I'm certain they would. And every single one of my guys said absolutely. They'll make room in their schedule. So it's like, oh, well, scrap the original plan. We're coming up.
Yeah, because it was you, because he was like, hey, I know that you're, in Michigan and stuff, and we're gonna be up here, whatever, if you want to come hang out. And so I was already planning on going to that area and do like our group kind of eval thing. Like I had talked about it before on here, but I think it was kind of the first one that we were going to do too. It was always something that I'd wanted to do, to have kind of more of a focus, like, instead of just going and having kind of like a loose objective stuff, having something where it's a little bit more, designed to suck a little bit more. That was sort of the plan already. So then when he reached out to me, I was like, well, if you guys are, want to come out a week ahead of time, you can either do it along with us or, hang out and do your own thing while we do this, or, we can figure out some way to integrate it. And then the idea you guys want to play op for, and everyone was cool with that. So that was, yeah, no, I'm thankful that you guys came out and did that, because I think that it was I think that the problem is that a lot of people's kind of bar for what they consider training and not is pretty low. Would agree or disagree, but I've said that before out here too, where like guys will walk, less than a mile from their cars and set up a fire and go hang around it and then leave, and they're like, yep, got some good
That was the training exercise. Yep.
Yeah.
I was out. I touched grass. I was in the field.
I know my guys. It was definitely like that at first when I showed up into the group, because I showed up like a year or two late. But more recently, I'd say in the last year, we started coming out with like actual schedules, like month to month, and having training plans and whatnot. And it was starting to go really well. And then this Force on Force event happened, and it kind of woke everyone up. We're like, oh, we need to start taking this way more seriously. And it's definitely a good thing, because like a couple weeks later, one of my guys who was there went out with another group of guys from Wisconsin and was teaching them patrolling, like all the stuff I had taught him and some of the stuff he learned from his Force on Force event. And he came back to me, he's like, dude, if it wasn't for that Force on Force event, I don't think my own event would have gone as well.
Yeah, you need, if you're doing the whole small unit tactics or CQB or whatever, which just this kind of sidebar, does small unit tactics include CQB, like small numbers of people room clearing? I would say it does. I mean,
I would,
feel like,
yeah, I would too.
I hate kind of like separating the two, but like everyone on Instagram or whatever is like, oh, SUT versus CQB, which one's more important? And I don't think, I think one falls into the other,
Well, I think that there's a line drawn between like rural and urban, and that's where people associate certain things, and that even came down to like a lot of stuff with like when people were arguing heavily about barrel length, and like the recce rifle thing was like, people were like, oh, for urban environment, CQB, I want to do short barrel, and for in the woods, I want to have longer. And it's so kind
funny
of the point where like,
how spoiled. It's so funny how spoiled we are here, because like, obviously you guys know in the military, it's like, okay, here's your gun and that's it.
Yeah.
There is no
here's your 14.5 M4.
Have fun. We're giving you, or here's your saw, or here's your 240, or here's your M110, or whatever the fuck you're carrying. Like, here you go. Figure it out.
I will say that a 14.5 with an ACOG is still probably one of like the best. Is definitely one of the best.
Absolutely. My favorite setup, dude. What's my favorite setup? I think it's the most like ubiquitous. I think it's the, I don't really talk about gear too much, but that's what I learned how to shoot on. Was an M4 with an ACOG. So it's always going to hold a near and dear place to my heart, and it's pretty foolproof.
Oh yeah, it's so good.
You're not going to win. You're not going to win any like precision marksmanship competitions. But if you're trying to keep a minute of man, like you're pretty set.
Well, not
and it was.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, and it was really funny too, because in CQB school when I went through, there's like, oh yeah, here's your little M4A1 with an EOTech, and it's like cool. Um, when I get back to my unit, I'm gonna have ACOGs, and no one will have any real experience doing this kind of CQB of ACOG, so we're just gonna make it work. And in the end, when we started incorporating it with mount and like actually patrolling up the target and doing stuff like that, the ACOG was so much better than the EOTech because you were using it more.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, limiting your optic choice to it's hard because you know, no matter what, odds are that any mission, unless it's something like pretty straight rural, like an ambush or like a reconnaissance, is going to involve structure. So no matter what, you need it, you're going to end up inside buildings or around buildings or in otherwise close quarters.
Oh,
but
yeah.
For some reason, the ACOG's still like, fuck it, it'll work.
Well, the ACOG too is just, I mean, like the bind and aiming concept was like the ACOG was designed around that, where you can keep both eyes open. For me, it doesn't work so well because I'm cross-eye dominant. But you can leave both eyes open and like basically have like a close quarter optic, and even doing stuff within, like I've done stuff within 10, 15 yards of a target with the ACOG at, I mean, it's locked in at 4 times magnification, and you bring it up and you're good. But, and it's, yeah, not to like completely derail this into a barrel length argument, but like when I first joined, I was issued an M16A4. For the first few years that I was in, I was only using the M16, and I got an M4 kind of early, and then in like a year Marine Corps switched over to M4s, and so I was like, oh, this is sweet. And then everybody had M4s, and I was like, all right, I don't feel so special anymore. And then once I started using it, I was like, okay, this is preferable. And then like 2 years ago or so, a year or two ago, I had a 14.5 upper, and I traded it for a 20-inch M16 upper, like a full A4 upper. On it, like it basically was my rifle, that like the same Marine Corps rifle setup, and I was using it a little bit, and it was a lot softer shooting. But I was like, when I really went to dive down everything, I was like, yeah, this kind of is suboptimal. Like, you get higher velocity, but that doesn't to accuracy, and like 5.56 out of a 20-inch barrel still is going to get stopped by level 4 plates, so you're really not gaining any crazy capabilities.
Yeah,
and
you
then
don't get any crazy advantages.
Yeah, like I don't know. And then once you start adding suppressors and all that stuff, you're like,
yeah.
Which granted,
it becomes a real party.
Like an M16 A4. So.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, sorry. Gio, you were talking about like the weird that people have of small unit tactics for CQB, and why that's not really like a debate to be had.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, anything important that you're going to do on an objective is going to require you going inside structures that are there. Like, you can't just leave them empty. Like, you can't just leave them unsecured. So even the most like hardened woodland, rural patrolling dude, you're still, your life is still going to focus on building. So I don't see the separation and calling it small unit tactics versus CQB. I think it's like a weird false dichotomy.
Yeah, and it's always funny too, because you'll see people who's like, oh, I don't need to train CQB at all because I'm never going to be like inside of a building. So I'm going to be in the woods and on my farm and all this. It's like, okay, well, what if you come across like
every day?
Yeah, it's like, yeah, dude, you sleep indoors every day. It's like, okay, what if you come across a dude who's like dug himself a little trench with hidey holes in it, or some dude who set up a shit ton of tents?
Or the common meme where people will be like, "Oh, I'll just use a grenade," and it's like, have you ever handled a grenade? Have you literally ever owned one? Or
where are you getting one?
Dude, I love hearing people say like, "Oh, I'll just use a grenade," and then like the first time you're handed a grenade, you're like, "Oh fuck, oh shit!"
You're like shaking because like, oh, this is death in my hand.
Yeah, you like your brain kind of puts 2 and 2 together. Like, if I fuck up with this, I'm going to die, or I'm going to be hideously maimed. Like, there is no alternative. Like, I'm either throwing real good, or this is going where it's going, which I've had it not happen before. Luckily, with a fucking training grenade.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Have you ever
we were-
seen those videos where it'll be like guys training for that stuff, and they'll go to throw like a flashbang into a room or like a training grenade,
Oh god.
and they'll throw it and it'll like hit the door frame and just bounce back.
Oh, dude, that
God.
happened to me. That happened to me. We were doing live fires in Texas. And we were doing like squad assault to bunker, or like it might have been. I don't think it was platoon. I remember if it was platoon, it was very small. It was like 2 squads, like half the platoon doing it. But anyways, I was part of the assault team, and I was there, and I had the fucking grenade, and luckily it was just a training body with a fuse in it, and I don't know what compelled me to just like toss it, or kind of like beam it in,
One.
and it bounced. No, dude, and so the opening is only like the size of like a car window type shit, and it bounces off the back wall and rolls and flies right back out. So I grab my team leader and I like push him down to the ground and roll away, and fucking thing goes off. Luckily it was a training video, but I was like, dude, so the second time we did it, I literally just shoved my fist in, dropped the grenade, and just pulled my hand out. I was like, dude, I'm not fucking with this anymore. I've never had good luck with grenades in the fucking army, dude. Like, it's always something. They're just weird because you don't expect them to bounce as well as they do.
Yeah.
Sometimes they just do, and you're like, oh shit, this isn't what I imagined.
Yeah, it reminds me of that video.
What?
Oh, I was just saying, it reminds me of that video that I keep seeing pop up on Instagram. It's like the fake drains in like the Normandy bunkers where you toss a grenade in and it's like a drain that just comes right back out at you.
Oh,
it's just like a U-shaped
pipe. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because the Japanese pillboxes had, or maybe it was the German pillboxes. One of the pillboxes had, like exhaust holes in it and like air vents, and so dudes were throwing grenades in them and just completely killing everybody inside because you can't escape from that and you're in an enclosed space. And so then they started making decoys, and so like you don't know which vent is the real one, and you throw a grenade in and it would just like roll back out because it was just like a curved piece of tubing.
That sucks.
There was something else too that I'd like read or listened to or something one time where these guys were in Afghanistan and they were about to go like clear a house, or maybe they were in Iraq or something, and they went to throw a grenade in, and because the houses in this area were all like mud huts, or maybe it was like on the other side of a wall or something that was just made of dirt, like everybody just got wounded from this grenade because they threw it over the wall and the entire wall collapsed around them, and like shrapnel just chewed up everything and them included. So like 5 or 6 guys ended up getting wounded and having to be extracted out because of it. But yeah, it's just kind of a funny thing where people that have never even seen a grenade in real life will be like, oh, I don't need to learn how to clear a room, I'll just use a grenade or something like that. But
not to mention I was gonna say, not to mention, since most of the walls are drywall, like have fun with that when the shrapnel just comes through and hits you in the groin.
Yeah. Although if you're the guy on the outside, it's great because you just throw a grenade in each room and it'll probably saturate the entire house.
Yeah.
That too. Everyone just throw it into an outside window and run away.
Oh no, it landed on the porch. Didn't do anything.
Yeah, then it's funny too because there was actually, like two points on that, are that like one, I think that one of the funniest things to bring up whenever people are saying about how they'll just only be in like the most rural, far out environments and all that is like, one, most people haven't been out for a week or more at a time, and most of the time, like when you really break down, like, okay, this is gonna be, for anybody that is like a bug out bad guy, or like they build something like that, it's like a 72-hour pack. Realistically, it's like a 3-day pack. Like surviving past 3 days or a week at most, or 2 weeks, or even a month is like pretty not easy, especially if you don't have a support system. Like if you're not actually getting food and resupply and stuff like that, and you add the whole thing like combat and stuff, which the funniest part about that whole thought process too is like people aren't just gonna go out in the middle of nowhere to fight over nothing. Like people are gonna be in strategic locations and stuff, and there's definitely gonna be like areas that are strategic areas to stage gear in, or bring guys back to rest and everything outside of a city and all that. But other than that, like most of the people that are claiming that they're going to go out in the middle of nowhere and fight, it's like, dog, your will to kill yourself because your life sucks, because you left everything and decided to go out in the woods and try to hack it. And then like they literally have shows like that where they give people $1 million to survive 90 days out in the wilderness alone. Like, you know what I mean? And
a lot of the times these guys are like quote unquote experts too.
Yeah, these are like the experts, the guys that are going to do it, and they generally fail. And it's usually from stuff like getting sick and getting diarrhea, or they lose something like, oh, I lost my ferro rod and now I'm going to die. So
congratulations, you're going to die of the same diseases your ancestors did.
Yeah, literally. All that work they did for nothing. No, but even Nigel, you were saying like, you guys would go do CQB and you go approach the mountain town. It's like you still need to use small unit tactics. Like CQB is like a genre of small unit tactic.
That's really the best way to put it. I've learned, the more that I learned about close quarters shit, and then all the stuff around it, because it's not just the entry team. It's depending on what tactics you're doing. If you have a cordon, which hopefully you have the numbers to do that.
Hopefully
they're a completely different. There are completely different ranges and different, not SOPs, but they have completely different jobs than the entry team does. And there's a responsibility to deconflict, and all this sort of stuff. But the more I learn about it, the more that I just kind of figured like it's all just small unit tactics. It's just the width of what you're doing. Like you're still adhering to the same principles inside of a building as you are outside. And it might not be like the same formations or anything, but it's still, you want the most guns pointed towards your most likely avenue of enemy approach, shit like that.
Yeah, I mean, you still need to approach, you still need to infill, you still need to exfil, you need to have proper patrolling techniques and movement techniques that whole way. Yeah. You need to have proper security, you need to have, all that stuff. You need to have like all these things that play into small unit tactics translate over into CQB. It's just now instead of doing an assault through an area, or like clear out an area that's in a wooded environment, or have trench warfare or something like that, then you're just including these structures. And the other thing too, like a quick story before we kind of move past this, or whatever, is that there was one, some friends were up north in northern Michigan, and we were doing our thing that we normally did, and like the woods that we went to, there was like houses kind of, but there was a large portion in the center that was just kind of like there was no house. It was just like ORV trails and state land that people would hunt on and camp and kind of do whatever. And that's what we would do, because it was big enough to where you could go out there and nobody would hear you or see you or do anything. And occasionally there'd still be guys going through in ORVs and all that you can kind of evade and all that. But anyway, I was looking at some satellite imagery of the area, like on Google Maps before we went out, and I noticed that it looked like there was a structure. So I pinned it, and we did a movement and went and found the structure. And then the first thing that we did was like cordon off the whole area. Well, it wasn't really like a cordon. We basically just maneuvered around the area while one guy covered the front entrance, because we didn't know what this was. It was like a big metal building in the middle of the woods. And there was like kind of a path leading to one of the main like Forest Service roads. And so we're circling the outside, and the whole thing is metal. It's like a garage. And it was funny too, because the guy that I was with, he had his water bottle, because it ended up being kind of a botched thing, because we were supposed to just do like kind of a quick movement, like there and back. And then me and my wonderful navigation skills at the time, I led us in the wrong direction on the way back, and we ended up doing like 4 or 5 miles extra than what we wanted to do. But the one guy didn't bring like a day pack or anything, and he just had a water bottle in his pocket, like a smart water bottle. And we were going along the back or the side of this thing because we were completely like clearing around the outside to look for any signs of activity or people or anything. And this water bottle sticking out of his pocket, and the cap hits the siding, and it's like that metal like ribbed siding. It just makes a ton of noise, and I'm like, "Oh, you fucking idiot!" So we ended up going inside, and like we did a very basic, stack up, or we were on opposite sides of the door, and it wasn't center fed. It was the door was on the right side of everything. So I kind of gave him a quick thing like, "Hey, once we open the door, I'm gonna go left, you go straight," because there's just two of us, and open up the door, go in, and it was just a big empty garage with a concrete floor, and there was some trash in there in cans that had expired years prior, and all that stuff, and there was no signs of anybody there. And then so my aunt and uncle have property in that kind of general region, and they have for a long time, and they kind of know everything that goes on. And I know this area because I grew up going there, and I went hunting there, and me and my dad would go camping there and stuff. So when I first got a vehicle and was like, oh, I can kind of do whatever I want, I just started going to this area because it was really the only place that I knew. And so I asked my uncle if he knew about it, and apparently this guy had bought this little plot of land, built a garage on it that he was going to use for storing his ORVs and all that stuff. And then he just stopped paying on it, and after a while the state just took it back. So it's just kind of public, like it's not private property. It's just that I paid for it and is now public. So anyway, fast forward like a year or two later, me and some buddies go up in the winter, and our plan is that we're going to do a movement to this building. We're going to clear it, and then we're going to stay in there overnight because it was pretty cold out and snowy and stuff. And so we go there, and we get in, and there's like a random car in this building. Like people are obviously, they know about it and they're using it. So we ended up staying the night there. It was dusty as fuck, and like I ended up just being paranoid all night because I was like, tonight's going to be the night somebody comes to get their car back. And then halfway through the night, I thought, what if there's a dead body in the back of that car and it's just cold out, and that's why we can't smell it yet or something. And but yeah, I don't know. Anyway, the next day we packed up and left. But yeah, that's kind of the moral of the story, is that like even if you're out in the middle of the woods doing your thing, like there's still actually people are going to build structures, and you want to take this over because it's a structure that you can get into and have shelter and warmth and all that stuff. So yeah, I don't know. I think that the fact that there's an argument of like CQB versus SUT, one isn't really an argument at all, and then two, that's like, I don't know, it's just dumb.
Yeah, they're basically arguing about which side of the same coin they like more.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. No, I agree. But yeah, the whole thing with like doing force on force is it's basically like I guess to explain it, then it's like, you go out in the woods all the time with your friends, and it's like studying for a test, and then you go out and you kind of do like a practice test with like a force on force thing. Like one thing that I noticed was that it was a lot easier for guys to maintain light and noise discipline when they're like, oh, there's actually an enemy out here.
Yeah, we ran into that as well, because a lot of my guys at first, they were kind of relaxed, but then when they started to think about it, like within the first 20 minutes, I watched all of them become super mindful about their light noise discipline, just their overall signature they're giving off, and just how they acted and moved was way better than anything I had seen, because they were actually thinking about it. Because I could only imagine that in their minds, they were finally like, oh, I have a living, breathing, and thinking enemy out here that if I am too loud or I'm too noticeable, I'm going to get my team just smoked by blanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even though it's just blanks and it's all like fun at the end of the day, it's still like, that competitive spirit kind of takes over, and that whole thing of like, okay, well, I don't want to be the one to use my light while the enemy's in the general area looking for us and trying to outsmart us, outmaneuver us, and then know where the entire group is at and all that stuff. Like we ended up changing the plan a couple times because I don't know if you know this, but so like I guess for everyone's sort of background, like when we went into planning, the first thing that you obviously need to come up with when you start doing force on force is like the safety aspect of it, especially because we were using blanks.
Oh yeah.
So you don't, first of all, like the biggest rule with blanks is you never do live fire before blanks. Like if you're going to have like time for everybody to hang out and shoot the shoot guns and play on the range and stuff before you go into the live fire thing, like don't do that. Push that to the end. I told guys like that's fine. I'm not I was like, I'm not even bringing any live ammo for my rifle. So we did like full shakedowns of everybody to make sure nobody had live ammo on them. Nobody did. Like nobody from my group even brought any. I don't know if on your guys' group if anybody brought any, but my plan was just to lock it up in my car because we weren't going to be by them. But yeah, so we did that, and what like the plan too. I had my staging area. So what our original plan was that we were doing we were going to have our staging area, and then we were only going to set up a patrol base like a couple hundred meters from our staging area because the staging area we had was kind of in the center. So we like for kind of our play area, which by the way, the play area was way too big.
Oh yeah, way too big.
Well, it was also dude, like the play, like so there's a center road that went east west along the center, and then we had roads going north and south on both sides that were kind of like our limits. So the road in the center just kind of bisected it between like the northern area and the southern area, and then we had like railroad tracks to the south and like so we had like clearly defined play areas. But the thing was that the play area, this was the original thing for me when I wasn't planning on doing a force on force. So it was just going to be us like walking around the whole thing. And it was like, okay, here's kind of the general area that we're going to be in. And then when the whole thing came on where it's like, okay, well, you guys are going to set up a base camp in the area and play like an occupying force, then we were going to come in and try to find and then clear you guys out. That was sort of the scenario. Was that I didn't really know how to narrow it down. I wanted kind of clearly defined things where it's like, okay, if you hit this road, you can't go any further. But yeah, in hindsight, that was one of the biggest things was we had way too large of an area as we had. Like you guys had what, like 20 or 25?
Originally, we were going to have that many. That's what we had planned on. But towards the actual date coming up, I think it dropped down to like 14 was our final number.
Yeah, okay. So we had 14 as well. So when you start putting like 14 guys versus 14 guys, so basically squad versus squad, in an area that's, I think that the center road was like 3.5 or 4 miles long. That's going east-west. And it was kind of like an hourglass shape. And then at the northern part, like the east-west, and anyway, like the north-south quadrant was like 5.5. So we had a shit ton of room we had like 20 square miles to figure it out.
Yeah. And we ended up setting our PB super close to you guys anyway.
Yeah. So did you guys know ahead of that?
No idea.
Oh, okay.
Damn.
So it's funny because I don't know if you had picked up on this or not, but our safety driver for like the whole event that was going to go through for any sort of cold casualties or, if God forbid something happened with the blanks or some sort of thing needed to occur. We had a safety driver who could go and pick up the guys and expedite them to the hospital or take care of them there because he was an EMT and stuff. Anyway, I basically probed him to be like our local contact in the area to play into the scenario, and I bribed him with some beer to give me some intel on you guys ahead of time.
Hey, dude.
It it was funnier too because midday where it's like, man, we've sent out so many security patrols and we think we found some of your guys' tracks, which it ended up being your guys' tracks.
It
You
was
guys
literally my
patrolled.
track. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys patrolled within like 100, maybe 120 meters of us. We had no idea. But I remember it's like, yeah, we can give you like our 4-digit grid and then our 6-digit grid. And I think it was after the 6-digit grid, he calls us and he goes, yeah, when I told him your guys' 6-digit grid, he just sighed super loud.
Dude, so ahead of time, my idea was that we were going to go drive our vehicles into the center of the area and then set up a patrol base and then push out patrols to the south and the north. And I told him, hey, this is where we're going to be at. And that was more of like a safety note kind of thing. Because we were going to have our vehicles there, and then that was going to be kind of like our respawn point as well. And we were going to keep some spare water and stuff like that there. And so then he ended up saying, hey, their area that they want to set up in, like their base camp, is going to be like 1.3 miles from you guys. I was like, okay, that's pretty good. Because the other thing too is that I wanted to know kind of the rough distance, because since this was still like an evaluation thing, we had kind of like a quota to hit for distance traveled. And you start going from like purely evaluation to having like force on force, we had to constantly kind of step back and remind ourselves like, okay, we could expedite this whole thing and just go straight into this spot and then go and just be super hard and find them and kill them. But then like, we're going to not have time. Like it's not going to take up much time, especially once we got closer and kind of knew more where you guys were at, which didn't end up happening until I physically
hopped into safety Vic.
I was in your guys' staging area and pulled a grid and was like, okay, this is way off from what I had.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll get to that part. So yeah, we he told me where you guys were gonna set up at, and then roughly like distance. So then I went on the maps and I figured out like every single decent spot where you could drive a vehicle into. And I sent him a screenshot of like all these pins. And he goes, one of those is pretty much it. I was like, okay. And then you guys were going to be in the north. So like north of that main road. So my plan changed to where we were still going to bring the vehicles to the same spot to stage, but then we were going to do like a 6.5 click movement and check out a couple points through the first night, set up a patrol base, check out 2 more points. And then if you weren't there, which I ended up figuring out that you guys were setting up pretty much all the way in the eastern area.
Yeah, towards the eastern edge.
Yeah, and then we were going to move to the east and do that. So I didn't tell anybody when I knew for sure when I knew where you guys were going to be at, I didn't tell anybody, kind of to keep that like exercise-ism at play there. It was more or less like a thing in the back of my mind for like planning routes and stuff, just to know like, okay, this is where they're at. But then I also knew like you guys were going to have patrols out, and he said that there was going to be like 2 OPs that were going to go out and stuff. So, there was still that whole thing with the unknown. And then because there was that river going east and west, like just north of that road, there was 2 main ways to cross it. So we were going to cross all the way on the western edge to go into the north, because I figured you guys were going to set up an OP kind of in that center bridge, because that would be like a, more or less a highly, like the most likely avenue of approach.
Mm-hmm.
So then when we were actually, so we all meet up in the general area. We're like in the very southern area of the AO, and shake hands stuff. Everybody introduces themselves, and we do like our shakedowns and start prepping everything. And then you guys all push to your area and then come back and pick up some more guys and shuttle them in. And then the safety driver, Josh, he tells me, he's like, yeah, they are not setting up in that spot. This is their new spot they're setting up at. And he tells me, and I was like, oh shit, this is like really close to where our staging area is gonna be. And the last thing I want to do is highlight our infill with like vehicles and headlights, because the other thing too is that it's perfect. It always happens this way. The day that we were there, it was a new moon, cloudy, like literally dark as shit.
Ungodly dark.
It was so dark.
That's the worst.
I couldn't see anything through my PVS 14s.
Dude, it happens every time without fail too. Every single time that we have like an overnight where we're gonna be moving throughout the night and stuff, it's like, oh, new moon. You have nods on and it's still difficult to see. Granted, I'm still thankful I had them versus nothing, because if I had nothing, then I would have not been able to see at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was like way too dark to cut the lights and drive just through nods. And like, I didn't want to have lights on and highlight our infill, because, you know, with one PVS 14 throughout your entire group, one guy that's looking to the ocean that you guys really would be is like to the west. Seeing one light flash between a handfuls through some trees on a very dark night when you have a bright light is not that difficult. So it was going to be a huge thing. So I think that we were just going to leave from our staging area and do like an 8-click movement, and then set up a patrol base, and then throughout the night, you know, do more movements and stuff. So we ended up doing that whole movement, which we had 3 guys come and kind of join us last minute. They were guys that I already knew from the Marines, but they were in like a buddies group, and he kind of put out a whole like probe thing and just wanted to see who wanted to come out, and they did. So the one guy had a clip-on, he had a Cody clip-on for his nods, and so we just stuck him at the front of everything. And at one point too, we were kind of going and like moving through the area, and he stops everything, and we're sitting there for so long, and he's like, we are speaking so quietly too, because it's like dead silent in the woods, and he's like, I see a heat signature, and we're like, oh fuck, and we're like kind of going on like a trail, because it's too dark, and at this point, like, we were sacrificing some of the security for speed because it started to rain, and so we're sitting there for time, and he's just staring at this heat signature. None of us can see what he's looking at. None of us know. I'm sitting there. I'm like, I'm not passing anything back because I don't want to make noise. And so like, we're sitting there, and I'm just waiting for the thing of like, okay, I see a couple people here. And he just turns back and goes, oh, it's a squirrel. We all just stand up and
Oh god. My god.
It ended up moving, and because he just kind of saw, he didn't know if it was like somebody's head, and they were in like a little bit of like a dip or something, like a dip. Ended up turning and moving because it was sitting still for a long time, and he like saw the outline better, and he's like, oh, it's a squirrel.
What's crazy about like this type of force on force training, like this general two sides opposing each other put in the same area, is obviously, yeah, everyone's kind of on their toes because they don't know where they're going to be. But,
Yeah.
You know, the problem is you might spend a lot of time aimlessly wandering. It's kind of interesting that we don't see more situational training exercises where it's like they come up with the mission, and then like you run if you have a platoon, let's say 4 squads, you run each squad through the same lane, or you run the entire platoon through the same lane like 3 times or something. And then, the OPFOR are there to do a very specific thing. And I'm surprised we don't see that more often, because that was the most common force on force engagement we saw in the Army, at least, was very like, in terms of like what your boundaries were kind of tight. Like you were pretty much funneled into a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the thing
too,
was that we had set up a thing where it's like, if we don't find you guys by this time, give us your rough location so we can come find you, because the last thing that I wanted was like everybody come out and just wander around for 2 nights and all day Saturday, and we just don't find shit.
Yeah, it was super funny in our patrol base, because by about 1 PM Saturday, everyone's like, man, where are they? We haven't seen them. And like complacency started setting in, and people were getting bored and whatnot. And I had to look at them and be like, this might be the closest representation to like patrol base operations from the Marine Corps that I could give you guys.
Yeah. Yeah. You just sit there.
Like, you're going to be bored. You're going to sit on security. You're going to be bored, and you're going to wait to see if something happens, and then when
it happens all of a sudden.
Yeah,
Well,
and when you're favored, you get to go out on a security patrol.
Yeah. And so like we did this whole movement, and luckily, like between us, all 14 of us had night vision, and we had 2 guys that had thermals. So we had the guy in the front that had the clip on, then the guy in the back had a bridged PVS 14 with a thermal. And so we had the capability to find people and like navigate through the woods, because that's the other funny thing too that you'll run into online, where like anytime somebody brings up night vision, there's inevitably one person that would be like, why would you get night vision when you can get a thermal instead? And it's like, dude, have you ever tried to walk at night through the woods with a thermal on?
Yeah, it's a nightmare.
Impossible.
It's not going to work, especially once you go off trail and you're like in the woods. It just doesn't work. Like I remember there was even a time where we did a trip where we were going, it's actually in that same area where that little like hut is that I was telling you guys about earlier, that garage. But we were going and we were going to go, because that night we were going to walk on these trails, and there was some dude that was just chilling in like a van, like by the side of this road that we had to cross. And so we were sitting there and we're like, what is going on? And we sat there long, just in the darkness. Once again, zero loom. Like that night was truly dark. And it's always cloudy too. I don't know why. But he would occasionally like turn on his car to charge it, like charge the battery or heat it up or whatever. And he was just sitting there like smoking cigarettes. And the lights were pointed at the trail that we had like walked to cross where he was at. So we sat there for a while, and then we ended up just making the executive decision to go and do like a 90-degree offset kind of deal, where we went, because we were traveling to the east. So then we were going to go like the main road, the main trail that we were trying to go on was east-west. So we were moving south to turn and go to the east. So we ended up going straight east through the woods and then going south onto that trail. So we just kind of, like bypass this guy. So we all start walking into the woods, and there's like really thin ass like wispy trees. This is like April, so the foliage hasn't really come back yet, so you can't see these things. The only way that you can see them is with your IR illuminator on. That's the only way that you can see these branches, because otherwise you just can't see them. Like, they're way too thin. And it was a nightmare just walking through this stuff, just getting whipped in the face constantly. And like, we knew that's kind of when the complacency set in. Like, we knew that there was nobody else. There's no chance anybody else is out there with night vision, especially when we were just like going through the woods. Like, there's nobody that's going to be out in that area with night vision in the exact area that we're at, like in the woods, just chilling, because we're just, nobody knows that we're out there, right? And so we got kind of complacent. We're like using our IR illuminators to try to see these little branches, because we just got sick of getting whipped in the face. I was like, fuck it, I don't even care. Like, I had mine on. Everybody had to like swap batteries at some point on their NVGs, because they're like, I had my PVS 14 at the time. And then yeah, it was funny. But yeah, dude, so we went, we set up a patrol base, so we ended up getting to a spot. And at this point, we'd been going for, I think that we left at like 8:45 or 9 p.m. and we ended up dropping our packs and doing a leader's recon, or right around like 12:30. I think that we ended up setting up our camp around like 1 a.m. So, and at this point, like, it's raining pretty hard.
Yeah,
just, like,
that was almost
freezing
becoming
cold.
snow by that time.
Yeah. It was like kind of that weird middle ground between snow and rain. And so everybody drops packs. We do like a quick leader's recon, try to figure out a spot. Like, the area that we were walking through, we couldn't tell, because like from the map, there's all these little areas that look like clear-cut lanes, and you don't know if it's for like power lines, logging equipment or something like that, or if it's
Or
like
an
an
actual
actual
road.
road. And there was snow on the ground in this area, so you still can't tell. So we do a leader's recon. We kind of figure out where we're at, and like, out of the leadership element, we're kind of like, man, we should really be going further. Like, we need to go like further into the woods, because we were kind of on this, avenue of approach, whatever it was, whether a road or whatever. And which we ended up figuring out later that it was in fact a road. that could have like it went from, oh shit, that might be a road, to like, oh, that's a road, good thing that it doesn't look like it can be traveled, to, oh, okay, I'm driving down this road now. 'Cause that's how we ended up getting all of our packs and everything to shuttle it back. Was I'll get to that part. So we drop and we're like, all right, most of the guys probably don't want to go much further anyway, and we certainly don't want to do another half mile or mile into the woods, because we're like a mile from the road, that east-west road. So we go set up everything, set up a watch rotation. We decide that because it's way too damn dark and the weather is starting to get pretty bad, and the temperature is starting to drop, that we weren't going to do anything at night. We figured you guys weren't going to do anything at night. And just because of where we were at, like we were literally in the middle of the woods, like a mile from this road. We were like, there's no way they're going to stumble on us either. So we set up everything in like total complete darkness. Like I don't think anybody turned on a light. Maybe somebody turned on a red lens for like a half a second or something. But it was like I was on first watch, and then as soon as my watch was done, I just pulled out my bivy sack and put my sleeping bag in it and got in, and was like, yeah, whatever. Most of the guys set up tarps and all that stuff just because of how the weather really started to come down on us. So then, yeah, the next morning we did a small little patrol. There was 5 of us that went, and that's when we went to the point that we were told that you guys were going to be at. And then come to find out, because we went there, I like stood on the point and I was like, there's nobody here. And then come to find out that that's when we were only like 150 meters away from you guys. And just had no idea. Like we didn't hear you guys. We didn't hear any signs. At one point, like the safety Vic drove down that road. But we didn't stop them or say anything or anything like that. So we ended up going back. And
which is funny, because I think that's when our security patrol stumbled across the safety Vic around that same time.
Oh man. And dude, that's when it got like real. It was like, because we were going, we get to a point where we're like 100 meters from the road, and then the team leader for the team that went out, like our recon team, and then I was like just kind of going on with them. He was like, hey, do you guys want to go up and just do like a little 2-man thing? We got radio still, like, we'll figure it out. Less people, you can be a little bit quieter, you can do a little bit of recon a little bit easier. So we go through, we got to cross like this dried out riverbed with all these like little ass trees. We're like crawling through this stuff to try to get through. Come to find out, it was clear, like 50 yards to the west, or which we ended up going back that way. So we get up to the road, and then we're looking around, don't see any signs of anything, don't see vehicles, nothing, and everything's covered in snow at this point too. So it still is kind of hard to tell what's going on. So we end up crossing the road, and we do like a little sills, and we're looking around, and then we're like, all right, let's go. We book it, go on to the other side, go in like as far as we can, and then don't see anything, don't hear anything, no signs of anything. Cross back to the other end because we have a little bit, it's a little bit more secure there because we were getting kind of close to the river. And there was a spot where I was kind of looking on the map, and it looked like we were close to like a little clearing. Like there was a trail that kind of went to the north a bit. And I was like, I'll bet you any money that they fucking drove on this trail and they're back there. And we were like right there. And I was like, oh, this is kind of spooky. There's only 2 of us, and there's an entire group of dudes.
All 14 of us just waiting for us
to show up. Because at this point, this is like 7 in the morning.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So it's funny now in retrospect that you guys had a patrol out at the same time. We were in the same area and just didn't even know.
Yeah.
Which the funniest part about that too is like, I totally commend everybody for setting up like tarp shelters. Like at one point, our one buddy, he was walking, and this is like when we were at night, and I was on watch and just fighting to not go to sleep. And he's walking, and he's like, he looked like he was gonna die. Like he was stumbling around and all that stuff. I was like, are you good, dude? He's like, I can't see a damn thing. And I think that he took his night vision off to throw a beanie on, and I was sitting there, I still had my nods on because I was on watch, and I was like, here, walk this way, okay, go this way, there's a tree, like I'm toward his tarp, And he was like, "Oh, thank you." He got it, like, it was so dark out. Yeah, it was funny because in retrospect, like, we totally could have gone there. Everybody turn on white light, like, everybody just be fucking loud and nasty, and you guys still would have never known that we were there.
Yeah, it was a hilarious for us because after we had set up our PB, we thought the event had already started and you guys were pushing out as well. So we were like stressing strict light and noise discipline, like telling people to be quiet, like, hey, turn that light off. We could see it in our NVGs. And after like an hour of telling people, like, hey, be quiet, no lights, safety vet comes over the radio. It's like, hey, you guys have 3 minutes until the event start. And like me and the other like team leaders like looked at each other like with wide eyes, like we had just seen our friend blown up in front of us. It was like, everyone has 3 minutes of light. Do what you need to do now.
Yeah.
Because it was funny too, because like nobody set up a proper shelter in the night because everyone was terrified that you guys were just gonna come into our camp in the middle of the night and just light us up with blanks and we have to bump to another PB, and so nobody wanted to set up any kind of shelter. But
our plan what we were going to do was we were going to set up a patrol base and start cycling patrols all through the night because we knew that we had more night vision than you guys did, and we had thermals. Yeah, we had everything.
Yeah, we had one thermal and five NVGs for 14 people.
Yeah, and so what the original plan was with well, I guess the second plan where we were going to move up and set up a spot was because I was also told that you guys were going to start, like, you guys were going to have some mounted patrols, which once again, I think you guys should have done some mounted patrols. But then looking at the fact that you guys only had 14 after that, kind of makes sense to keep everybody together.
Yeah.
But I figured that you guys were going to have patrols and throughout the night, because then also guys can warm up and cycle through and stuff, like in a car with heat. And you were going to use a thermal for that. So I have a Relv Eclipse hide, and I was going to put it on like the side closest to the road. Because the one spot that we were going to set up at was kind of also like, it was a mix between like an OP and a patrol base. Like it was basically, we're setting up in kind of an area where we could watch a road for any sort of amount of patrols or anything like that. And I was going to hang the hide like to kind of offset, so that way if you guys are driving through and have a truck with a thermal, because I knew that you guys had one thermal, then it would be a little bit more difficult to see us. But that thing didn't end up getting used because we were just out.
Yeah. So for us, shortly after we set up like established a patrol base, we had our designated little team leaders set up the security while me and two other guys with night vision was like, yeah, let's go find a spot for like an LPOP, so that way, like, even if they don't have night vision, they can still man this and listen. And I think it was like halfway there, we're just like, man, it is dark. Maybe like we started to think maybe like they won't do any night movements either of how dark it is. We get to the PB spot and we stop and think about it. It's like we have 5 people with night vision, and we're coming from 3 different groups that have never worked with each other before. So some of these guys might not trust someone else with the safety of their $3,000 plus night vision.
Yeah.
And we look at each other. It's like, should we just scrap the LPOP idea for tonight and just have like a close kind of listening post, like basically on our security line? And we're like, yeah, let's do that. And we almost got lost on our way back with just how dark it had gotten.
Yeah.
That's such a hard thing to kind of like wrap around in training, is because everyone's night vision is self-funded. Like basically anything expensive, dudes really don't want to let go of them. 1, because you're worried about someone stealing it, and 2, just because you're worried about someone breaking it.
Yeah. And we had a plan to cycle our teams through security, but it was so dark where we were because there was so much top cover, and it was a new moon, there was all the clouds, and it was raining and everything, and everyone was kind of miserable. It got to a point where it was so dark, it was hard to even find where the next portion of the security line even started. Like you'd like trip over people not knowing like exactly where they were. So like shout out to Frontier Outlaw and one of my guys who kind of just like cycled 2-hour shifts all night to be their own security.
Damn.
And then I remember I just sat in my bivy sack all night with my Peltors on, just waiting for you guys to come crashing through the brush on top of us, and also answering radio checks. And I remember at one point I was getting ready to doze off, and Josh comes over to radio, just op for a radio check, and I about jumped out of my sleeping bag. It scared me so bad.
It's the worst
I was
feeling
just
in the world.
I was so exhausted. And then,
Dude, as soon as we got in the woods, we did not get a single radio check with the safety.
yeah, we were wondering. It's like, man, we haven't heard them over the radio either. It's like, I wonder if they're close enough to even get a radio check. And it wasn't until like 9 the next morning they text us and they're like, yeah, we haven't had any radio contact with them for like 8 hours. We're like, oh, that could be a problem.
Yeah, that was because we the other guy that was in the safety Vic, he had the same Motorola's that we had, so, and he was on the same net and everything that was like our primary net, so we were just going off of that. And so I was like, well, this way I don't need to switch freaks, like nobody needs to switch freaks if they, or switch channels or anything. So we were just going to do radio checks on that. But I mean, I tried. I think I got like 1 or 2 like real early in the beginning. And then as soon as we like went into the woods, we didn't get anything. And then like everyone just said fuck it and turned off the radios and stuff. And then in the morning when we were going through, I tried to get like 1 or 2, and then I couldn't get any. And I should have when I should have gotten one, but we just literally waited for it to pass, and then we went through, because I also didn't know, like, the fact that he had given me information, I didn't know if he was going to give you guys any information. Like, I was not going to give him any freaks as to like where we were at unless someone was hurt.
Yeah, I think at most he gave us like a distance, and it's like, all right, well, we're not going to them because for the scenario, we're technically not supposed to know you guys are even there until we make like physical contact or visual contact,
like the initial first contact.
And it was funny because all throughout the day, I kept sending out security patrols in different routes further and further out. I'm like, God, I have no idea how they haven't stumbled across them. And then towards the end of the day, I was just about to get ready to send out a security patrol, and we hear you guys shooting around like our cars, and we're all like, well, we're all in the PB. What are they shooting at? And like part of us went, man, I wonder if there's just some dude squatting in a bush right now, like fearing for his life.
Dude. So
after that, we sent out an LPOP.
Yeah, those were the guys that ran into me. That was terrifying. Yeah, dude. So we end up we send out our initial patrol in the morning, come back and go, and then the team leader for our recon team was like, I'm gonna go with them too. I'm like, all right, you do it. And so there was 4 of us that were back at the camp, at the patrol base, and they were out forever. Like I think that we did like maybe 3 miles in our initial movement. Dude, they were out all day. Like they ended up doing like 12 clicks. Like they were out for so long.
God.
And they like found swamps and stuff. Like no, they found Narnia, dude. And so
it's just rough
at a certain point, like our radios weren't able to reach far enough. So I'm talking to their patrol leader on the phone, and because we had like a crumb of service between a couple guys that had, I think Verizon had service out there. I'm talking to him.
I had good service.
Yeah, I didn't have any. I have AT&T, but we hashed out a plan where 2 of us were going to go back. Mind you, I think that if we went straight line through the woods, it was like six clicks. We were just going to beat feet back to the cars, grab 1 or 2 vehicles, go, because he was like, I think that we're close. And so what the plan was is that we were going to like try to drive by you guys, or we were either going to try to drive by you guys to draw fire, or we were going to have the team on the ground initiate contact, and then we were going to do like a drive by. So we start going, and we're like, I'm telling the other guy that we're going with, I'm like, because it was just us 2, we left 2 guys back. I was like, we're gonna be moving, so let me know, like, if you need to take a break or anything. Like, I'm, no shame in it. Like, I'll stop and take a break when I need to, but just let me know. He's like, all right. So we start going, and not too long after that, I get a phone call from Josh, and he's like, hey, Op 4 wants me to give you their grid. And I'm like, okay, what is it? He gives me a 4-digit, and I look, and it was like in the woods, like right by where our patrol base was. I was like, there's no fucking way that this is where they're at. There's no way they're at, because one, we haven't seen or heard anything. Two, we walked right past it, like on our initial thing. I was like,
Yeah.
I was like, that is not a correct grid. And I don't know if like whoever pulled the grid just didn't let the satellites like sync up enough or something.
Yeah, because it was me using my Garmin.
Oh, that might have been it then.
Yeah, and I
like,
made sure to calibrate it.
yeah, I don't know. Like if maybe if you had just turned it on, I really don't know.
Probably.
But
I was having
yeah.
issues with that thing the entire time.
So I'm talking to him, and I'm like, hey, we're going back right now to go to the vehicle to grab 2 of our vehicles. I was like, do you know where the Op 4 patrol base is? He's like, yeah, of course. I'm like, do you want to pick us up and take us there? And he's like, so I was like, well, this is the road that we're on right now. And I like sent him my location. He's like, there's no way I'm driving to where you guys are at. I'm like, all right, we'll meet you at this road. So we go to this north-south road, like kind of the limit, and go in like this little bunch of trees, and we see his car come up. So we get into the trunk and close the doors, because the bed and the trunk and everything were tinted. And he just drives right into the staging area for your guys' staging
Yeah,
area.
right where our vehicles are.
Yeah, right where the vehicles are. We're in the back of the trunk. I'm looking around, kind of get like an idea of what's going on, pull a grid, write it down. We're going back, call the patrol leader. I'm like, hey, this is the grid they're at. I'm going right now to get the cars. I'll be there in like a couple minutes because I'm getting a ride right now. At that point, he was like, what? And I was like, and so we were like, all right, well, let's do this. Once we get the cars, we'll pick them up, drive until we're like 100 meters out, and then drop off a little recon team, and we're gonna do this thing. So guys that are back at the patrol base, and at this point, like we were thinking about like how we were going to go and get them, but with everything, like, so when we didn't bring rucks. We only brought day packs. So we had all the rucks that were still back at the patrol base. A lot of guys left their nods in their rucks during the daytime, because of like the whole safety thing. Like we had team leaders had handguns on them with a magazine of ammo, just in case, since we had all this gear and everything. And we didn't know if there's going to be like a redneck coming in with a snowmobile or wolves or anything, because we're like up in the middle of nowhere. And
yeah, just safety rounds.
Yeah, they're just safety rounds. So one of the guys left his pistol belt back at around his ruck, so we had that going. And then we still weren't sure about that like road path thing that led basically right by our patrol base. And then I didn't want to have the entire patrol minus 2 guys out, and then we get a car stuck, can't get it on, they need to go, and that would just ruin everything, because there's no way either that the safety Vic was going to get back there. So taking everything into context, we decided over the phone, we're like, all right, we got to leave these guys to just watch the gear, because there's no way we're going to be able to get them. And then so at the same time too, when we got back to the staging area, Josh had just dropped off one of your guys that he was starting to show like hypothermia, I think.
Yeah, he was starting to hype out.
Yeah. So he had just gotten back, and I think Josh had told you guys that he had to pick up one of us for like a cold injury, and that you guys had like 30 minutes or so. He
said something like, you guys had like 5 cold injuries. I'm like, holy crap, we got it off light.
Yeah. Yeah, well, because then he told me, I didn't ask him to do any of this, but he told me, he's like, hey, you guys should have like 30 minutes where they're going to go back to their staging area and warm up and stuff. And I was like, perfect gap in the defense. Like, this is perfect. And so, we had a time constraint. we had guys that couldn't recover the vehicles. We didn't even know if the path was drivable, and we had all the gear left behind. So I was like, I don't want to have these guys go north a mile and risk getting hurt or something like that, leaving all the gear behind, like all the shit. So anyway, we leave them there to watch the packs. We pick up these 2 vehicles, go pick up the patrol, drive up that little trail that was like going north into your guys' staging area. And then once we were like 100 meters back, we dropped off 4 guys to approach, from the south, to go north into your guys' area. They were going to initiate contact. We were going to roll up from the east and then shoot west and form that nice L. So we're sitting there, and dude, we were sitting there for so long, just in the cars, just idling. And like at a certain point, the one guy in our car was like, I can see a truck through the trees. And I was like, fuck, they're going to see us. I was like, they are definitely going to see us. If they have any sort of security at all, they are going to see us. And I'm like, shit, we're dead. And so we hear over the radio, they're like, hey, we're about to initiate. We're like, all right, sweet. So I get ready, throw it in gear, like we're gonna go. Hear a couple shots, drive up, get out. I think that as I was moving, and then as I was getting out of the car, like I threw the parking brake up. Like I didn't even come to a full stop. Jump out. We go to sweep the whole area, and I'm just like looking for somebody to shoot at. And there's nobody there. And cars, like maybe I was like, oh, maybe they knew that we were coming, so they're gonna try to pull a fast one on us. So I like checked the cars, all the car handles were locked. I'm like, I don't know where the fuck these guys are at. And turns out that what our little recon element had seen was some logs that it looked like a deer blind, almost like where guys had stacked up the logs, and it looked like somebody was in there. So he was like, that's somebody, like that's like a sentry or something, like that's security. So they shot, and then they got by fire at the same time. And then that's when the funniest thing, and when you sent the clip of your helmet cam footage to me, and I sent it to them, he was like, dude, that hurt. When you go, what are they shooting at?
Yeah, because we're like 100, 200 meters away, and it's me and one of my buddies just sitting in the center of our BB. I think we're just kind of smoking a joke, and while everyone's out on security, and we just start hearing like gunfires. Like we look around, it's like, what are they shooting at?
Yeah, so
and that's immediate. It's like, yeah, we should probably go push out like an LPOP to kind of see like where these guys are going to come up from. But odds are, like, we know what direction they are.
Yeah. So we were all like, okay, where are they at now? So we start going to look at the river, and there was like a pretty decent drop from the ground to the river, like the riverbank.
Oh yeah,
below. So
super
I'm looking
steep
down. I'm thinking that you guys are all going to be like hiding, below the dip or something like that. And I'm like looking, don't see anything. We start moving into the west because there's kind of that little trail that we could go down. And then we're going, and then that's when I hear the gunfire up ahead. I'm like, all right, it's on. So I dump a couple rounds to do like that immediate suppression. I grab all the guys that are by me. I'm like, all right, let's go to the left, contact front. It's like, let's go to the left. We're going to go, to the left and then kind of sweep around so that way we can flank them from the side. And as we're running, then that's when your guys' little 4-man detachment that went to go check out the staging area, they run like right in front of me. And I was like, oh, yeah. I just dropped down to like just pass. And I dumped like all 40 rounds because my initial load mag was 40. I put all 40 rounds just to suppress. And then I tried to move back online. And then my goal was that if I could get back online with the other guys, because I was kind of in front of them, then we could start setting up that, fire and maneuver and that bounding and stuff and start sweeping. And it kind of just turned into like chaos. Like nobody was doing what they should have been doing. And so I get back, and then like one guy had moved up while I was going back, and then he was playing dead and all that. And so we were like trying to maneuver around. At one point I heard a whistle, and I was like, what's going on? And then
someone blew a whistle, and I was like, who the hell's blowing a whistle?
Yeah. I was like, what is going on? And then I was like, I don't know. And then I just heard shooting, and I was like, all right, I guess we're still shooting.
That's exactly what I did too.
Dude, so we end up moving up, and like a handful of the guys were playing dead. There was actually one point where it was pretty funny because there was one guy who was up and running, and I saw him, and I bring I bring my gun up, look at this dude through my ACOG, put 2 or 3 rounds in, and I was like, man, that was perfect. I was like, that was perfect timing on his part. Because that's the thing with blanks. Like we had set up kind of like a kill setup, or like a kill policy, a death policy.
Yeah.
And dude, it was so autistic too, because like we were like, it basically came down to like probability of casualties based on like proximity and terrain and like an ambush. Because I figured that like every time that we sent out a patrol, like somebody was going to get ambushed.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what we thought too.
So we had set it up to where like if you were close and it was open, like you're probably all gonna, the further back or the thicker the terrain is, like less guys die. So it was pretty much like all the team leaders would coordinate on the safety net, between the op 4 and blue 4, and then we would try to do that. Or if somebody like clearly killed somebody, or if somebody was up and maneuvering and you heard gunfire, like you were dead. That's kind of how we were gonna play it, because that's the thing with blanks, is that it's not perfect. I think that the gunfire is really good. And
it was very interesting because a lot of my guys said it was very weird to point a weapon at somebody, pull the trigger, and hear a gunshot. It was very surreal for them.
Huh.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it makes sense.
Yeah, because a lot of these guys have never fired a blank before, let alone at a person. So it was like, it's very weird for them at first. But for a lot of us as well that have done force on force in the military, it's like, oh, yeah, I might just go dump blanks in my buddy's like rack, like in the field just for laughs.
It's not really like a huge thing.
Yeah.
It ended up turning into like everybody just sort of was firing off their blanks to just, because it was the end of the day too. It was like in the evening.
Yeah.
And so we were all just like shooting, and
just having
guys were
fun with it.
basically just dying as they ran out of ammo or where they saw fit or whatever. And then
I remember one of my guys screaming, "Not my friend," and like falling over, this super dramatic death. Like,
well, that was funny because he was going, he was like in an open field, and I can't remember if I shot at him or somebody else did, but he falls. And I'm like, I'm maneuvering up. There's these 2 guys that are kind of behind like a piece of micro terrain, and I'm like maneuvering up on him and shooting. And he's like yelling, he's like, "No, please, no, that's my friend, no!" And I turn and just go pop pop and like put 2 rounds into him, and he goes ah, and dies. I was just laughing, and so like, and I recorded all of this on a GoPro, and so. My one buddy, he ended up it was actually Joe that had been on here before. He was the guy that helped like set up the whole thing with like the One Shepherd guys. He came up from Tennessee, and then we drove up together. So like he came up, spent the night, we drove up, and then on the way back we drove. He spent the night again and then left the next morning. So the next morning, we wake up and my wife like makes breakfast and everything, and we're eating and we're done, and I'm like, all right, let's plug in this GoPro footage and see what we got. And dude, he was laughing at me. He's like, you are having the time of your life. He's like, you're just shooting and laughing at like people dying. Because it was mostly because of that. Because I just turned like, we were pretty close to each other. And I just like turned and put 2 blanks into this guy, and he does like a little death, and it was just hilarious to me. So I was just laughing at it. He's like, you're fucking menace.
Yeah, because I think that was the same dude. I'm surprised we didn't hear the little war horn one of my guys brought go off in the middle of that.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think I heard that when like everybody was at the pre-staging area.
Yeah,
I think he blew it, and we were all like, "Oh, you got to be kidding me!"
Yeah, I didn't even realize he had brought it until he blew it.
Yeah, pretty much everybody like dumped their blanks, and then everybody pretty much ran out of ammo around the same time. But
yeah,
I think that the entire time, like looking at the video, I think that it's like 7 minutes long. So I think that there was really like 6 minutes of like actual actual force on force, pretty much everybody ran through 6 mags.
Yeah, because I remember looking at my footage. I have like 11 minutes of the entire engagement, but when I cut it down to the actual engagement, it was like 2, maybe 3 minutes. But granted, after the initial engagement, when it started, and I had dumped a mag just for that initial suppression, I had gotten up, backed off our line, grabbed a couple guys who were more towards the rear, and tried to maneuver around to that little OP we had set up. And that's when we came across you guys that were coming across our OP, and we were engaging you from like 50, 60 meters away.
Yeah. Yeah, because there was kind of that big open area that we all kind of got caught in. But I mean, that's the thing too, and I've heard that from guys that have gone to like Tusk and stuff. You know, take a Darcy shot. Is that guys will like be really aggressive at first with their ammo. And it's like, you still have a whole week and this is all you have.
You suddenly go, oh, I should probably save some of this.
Well, I got to have mags and dudes were tossing me mags and I was just going. It didn't really take that long to go through 6 mags. And granted, like, you know, Joe on the drive back had made a really good point where he's like, in real life, like, an actual battle like that is just heinous. Like that, the likelihood of a battle of that magnitude happening, even though it's like a squad on squad, he's like, that is like a big deal. Like that's
like, we're going back to rearm after this.
Yeah, like that is you would probably have like casualties throughout. Like you would probably only have a couple guys surviving.
Oh yeah.
And like that would be a big deal. Like at the end of something like that, it's not like, all right, well, let's go back to the patrol base and we'll get ready for the next one kind of deal. It's like you're done. Like you're done for a while.
Yeah. It's like everyone's dead except like 2 of us, and I think I just want to go home.
Yeah. I don't want to fight.
Well,
that's
style. Well, it's those lessons and doing force on force that puts everything in perspective, and then you get to kind of look at the whole thing retrospectively and be like, okay, if this had been real life, assuming we took X amount of casualties, you have to ask yourself the question, like, where would I find more guys? How am I going to get these guys' bodies out of here? What are we going to do post-engagement? Like, how is this going to change what we do? And it brings up all these questions that I don't think you get to think about until like well after the fact. Like, did you guys do any post-engagement actions? Like I'm not even going to say on the objective, but just like internally?
No.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, so after the whole thing, that at that point, guys started we pretty much called Index when everybody ran out of ammo.
Yeah, pretty much.
And then we ended up going, and we drove the guys back to the camp area. Me and some other guys had a Tacoma, so we grabbed the truck. And then we were like, all right, well, now we have recovery gear and we have 2 vehicles that are pretty capable. So we went through and then drove on that trail, found out that it led right to our patrol base. We were like, this was a terrible spot to set up. Granted, at the time we didn't know, but we should have just magically known. And then we started loading up all the rucks. And then, as soon as I get back, the 2 guys that are back there are like, what happened? We're like, oh. And they were a little salty that they missed out on the fun, but had to understand.
I know my guys afterwards talked a lot about it's like on how much that sucked and like how miserable we were. The last like 5 minutes of like excitement made it all worth it.
I mean, that's how a lot of this stuff usually ends up.
Yeah.
Because
that's the reality of anything like combat related too is
absolutely.
amount of time spent just planning the op. I mean, from your perspective, like you and I have the same perspective on that. Like I don't know how much time you spent just like looking at maps and trying to plan out, trying to ward and all that stuff. The amount of time that I spent just looking at this when I knew like kind of the rough area where you guys were going to be at was like very, it was a lot of time. And then
I could probably count the amount of time I looked at maps in days.
Oh, dude, yeah. There was a lot of time that just staring at like satellite imagery and like trying to figure it out. The other team leaders are being like, "Hey, I think that this is what we're gonna do," and having calls leading up to the event and trying to figure everything out. And And there is still like that kind of divide between like the exercise ism, or like the evaluation portion, where we were talking like basically our one guy, he was the one that went out on like all the patrols and everything. He was like, when we get there, like we should be doing patrols all night. Like we have the night capability based on the fact that we have more nods than they do. Like we can utilize that to our advantage. Like we can find them at night and within a little bit of time, and we're just gonna have to go the first night without sleeping and just moving all night. And then I kind of had to reel it back. It's like, all right, if we assaulted their position at 8 or 9 in the morning, like we still have all this rest of the time that we need to fill it in with movement and stuff, because we need to hit like limits and we need to test to make sure that guys know like, okay, this is what these are patrolling techniques, and evaluate everybody and give ample time to maneuver around to where all the guys can get confidence or criticisms on the leadership, right? Like, hey, this team leader sucks at this thing, or I wasn't prepared to do this, I should have been trained better, or hey, I didn't know how to do this. Okay, well, it's in the manuals I've sent you, look at it. So
Yeah,
that's kind of the difficult part of something like this, versus if it was purely a force on force event, it's like it's a little different.
yeah, because for like us, we weren't really doing a whole lot of evaluations, so we treated it like, hey, this is just regular patrol base operations. This is the training you're getting. So like you're going to go from security to a rest cycle to a patrol cycle. And what ended up happening was pretty much just everybody sat on security, and as we needed, we swapped people out to like go back, warm up, get food, and then go out on patrol, which was fine. It was daytime. Everyone had a good night's rest because of the night prior, and we had no patrols going out, so everyone was able to get some sleep, or what little sleep they could, because of the rain and no one had proper shelter set up.
Yeah.
I felt so bad for so many of my guys. They just woke up soaked.
Yeah, dude. When I woke up, that was actually one thing that in retrospect was very dumb. So for me, I was trying to use a little bit smaller of a pack, and I saved some space. I used a sleeping bag that has a warmer, rating. Like it was a 17-degree bag versus like my issued bag that's like a 30-degree. So originally I was going to use my 30-degree with a liner, and then I was like, well, I can use the 17-degree and be adequately warm. And well, I completely forgot that with down sleeping bags, if they get wet, they don't insulate you anymore.
Yeah.
So the next morning, go to pack everything up, and I put the sleeping bag in the bivvy that was thoroughly soaked in the same dry stuff sack, and then I put it back in my pack and pack everything up. And so like that night after Index, we ended up leaving that night. All of our guys pretty much did. They were all kind of individually like, hey, I'm just gonna head out tonight because there's nothing going on in the morning. And me and Joe were kind of talking like, oh, we can stay here and be well rested in the morning and drive back down. And like we had brought cots and tents to put on the cots for afterward, because I told them like, we can cozy camp Saturday night. Like you can set up how you want. And I was thinking about it, and that's at the point that I realized, I was like, my sleeping bag is soaked and that thing's not going to keep me dry. So at this point, it's either sleep throughout the night in the car, like turning on heat as needed, or we just leave at this point. And so we ended up leaving, and I drove through the worst blizzard I've ever had to drive through.
Yeah, we ended up, me and one of my two of my guys ended up driving back to Wisconsin through all 7 hours. And that first portion through the blizzard sucked, but once we got south enough, it was fine.
Yeah, but yeah, the whole thing with like, it's one of those things where it's kind of a bittersweet, like, when you do like a force on force thing, and like you were saying before, like you have a living, breathing, thinking enemy that's trying to also outmaneuver you while you are trying to find them and outmaneuver them. Guys really get it, light and discipline, noise discipline. when you do something. Like one guy lit up a cigarette at the patrol base. I was like, what are you doing? Which realistically, like after like pretty late, like right before we ended up, me and the other guy left to go get the vehicle, like we were pretty cold and we thought that the patrol that was out was going to come back soon and just be completely soaked. So we started a little fire in the patrol base, which you definitely should not have done. And it was one of those things where we were like, I'm kind of bored at this point. So I kind of hope that they come through and kill us.
Yeah.
Which
meanwhile, we just roughed it the whole night.
Yeah. Which obviously you're not going to do that in real life. So that was one thing. And then, well, it was funny too, because I had even joked with the guys before they left. I was like, as soon as they left, I was like, I'm making a fire. We're just going to be warm here. And they're like, come on, like joking. And then we actually did end up making one. Just we dug like a hole and stuff is every time that I would like I stepped back kind of far to look and I didn't really see any of the smoke like above the trees. And I was like, all right, yeah, it's probably good.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And where we were, the foliage was thick enough to where we couldn't see anything through thermals either. So there was no way we were going to spot you with that fire.
Oh yeah. And at that point too, I mean, we were like a mile and a half away through the woods. But yeah, it kind of sucks because like you see that the guys are capable of having that discipline and knowing like, hey, this is the importance of using patrolling techniques, and this is the importance of proper spacing and all that stuff. And then like next time that we do an event that where we go for a little while, it's like, if there's not force on force, I can guarantee that a lot of the discipline's going to start slipping because they know that there's nobody out there. Like,
There's no accountability.
There's that like bug that gets in dudes' minds. We're just out here. We're the only ones out here. We're the only ones that are part of this game. So it doesn't matter if I just, do this or whatever, or, make like those kind of comfort-based decisions that and it's kind of one of those things where you're like, oh, well, I know that I can, if I need to do it in real life, I can just go without doing this or whatever. But it's like, you do it enough and it just becomes so ingrained in you that like, it's more difficult to not. Like you should just, if you know that your training thing is only for a day or two, like you only need to be cold and wet for a day or two. Like you'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of a patrolling event we had planned in the summer that ended up getting canceled like the night before.
Wow.
What I had planned on doing was like, yeah, we're going to do like patrol base operations. And I told all my guys like, yeah, there's an OP4 out there. Like you're going to be yelling bang, bang. And in reality, like when we got out there, I was just going to like call my old man, be like, hey, do you guys have your OP4 ready? And I was just going to have them like, oh, yep, we're ready. Like, well, we're setting up our PV just to get my guys thinking there's an OP4 out there.
Yeah, I even said that to the other team leaders too. I was like, if something happens and OP4 can't come out or they need to bail, like I'm not telling these guys that there's no OP4 because I still want that in their brain that OP4 is out here. And there's little things that you could do that they're like intentional changes or screw ups. Like when we knew that we were going to go from being like less like right around to less than, I think that it might have been like 500 meters to 1,000 from the vehicles, and it turned into like 6.5 clicks and then 8 clicks. I didn't tell anybody ahead of time. Like we figured out that you guys are going to be in the north, like, I don't know, maybe a week ahead of time. I told team leaders like, hey, we're going to be going like this. Like these are kind of the routes I'm thinking. These are some possible patrol routes. That way they can tell me like, no, that's dumb. That we're going to do it this way. And okay, sounds good. So they knew that we were going to go a little bit further in the first initial night, but we didn't pass it to anybody else. And normally in real life, like I would pass that stuff for sure. But that's kind of the other part where it comes into like the evaluation versus the exercise specifically is like, for the force on force exercise, I would tell the guys like, hey, this is what we're doing. So if you need to lighten up your load a little bit, do that or whatever. But for the evaluation portion, it's like, because you guys both should like know is that, if you do an op, like hey, you guys are go do these other added on. Hey, there's more intel. You guys need to do this. Oh, hey, what we thought was going to be the plan has completely changed because the enemy is in a different area. Go do this now. So
yeah, and that kind of happened to us as well, because we had chosen two PB locations and pre-established LPOPs beforehand, and then the Canadians had gotten there before us, and they kind of walked the area, and it's like, yeah, we can't get there. So here's an idea for a new PB spot, and I looked at it on the map. I'm like, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So it, like, having that flexibility is important. Telling the guys kind of last minute after they have their rucks packed and everything, and as we're kind of waiting for the last guy to show up so we can, and also to give you guys prep time, like, hey, this is, it kind of brought everybody around the map and was like, this is where we're at, this is where we're gonna go, this is where we think that the OPFOR is, and all that. And they're like, so how far is that? We're like, it's like 6.5 clicks. And then that's when Josh came back and was like, yep, they can't get into their original patrol base spot, so they're going to move to this area. And then I was like, all right, well, and then we pondered the maps, and then one of the guys was like, let's just leave from here. And we're like, sounds good. So yeah, it's having that, like, I think that's the kind of some of the key ingredients, like a successful thing, is like knowing where you need to play the exercise because of the training value, or knowing where to play the objective, so to speak. Like the objective, if the objective for this was literally find you guys and kill you guys, and that was it, like, we would have definitely planned things differently than if we had what we did, where we had like, okay, well, we want to walk, between 15 and 20 kilometers through this time period, and we want to do this stuff, and we want to do this stuff, and all that. Like, once you start adding on these kind of other objective, had to remind ourselves is like the primary thing is, that's when you start to have to balance everything, so, and that's kind of
because there's there's a certain point where, like, we need to like stay true to scenario and follow objectives, but like on the other hand, it's like, at some point you're gonna have to kind of like game the game a little bit.
And I did that by getting in the safety Vic and riding there, like, and you can. I could have said like, oh well, in real life, if that's a local contact that's in the area, I could have called him and been like, hey, help get me in there. Kind of like, I mean, that happens a lot in real life, where they'll use like local people that can blend in and are already known by the enemy, not as being an enemy or whatever. Like, think of like Black Hawk Down, right? They had the dude drive up, and, drive up and show them where the target building was. So
exactly.
I was in my head, I was like, that's not too shiesty. We kind of had like the funny idea where we could have a couple guys like in the back of the safety Vic to initiate contact. We were like, no, that's too far.
Yeah.
Like that would not have been cool.
Yeah, but, we're just strolling up with like a hypothermia case, and all of a sudden
we
lit up.
Pop out, lit you guys up. Start eating the dead. Notionally. But I think that's because the other thing too is like, I've noticed too, like, when you start talking, and maybe this is just the few people that I've talked to, just based on the fact that they've like asked for help with events and stuff, is like, I don't know how often people come up with actual like scenarios to their thing. Like, I know that
like
there's
lore.
I have a, what's that?
Like lore. What?
Yeah, literally like lore, like FTX lore.
The Kingdom of Metropia or whatever.
Yeah,
and like, we've always had kind of because once I started getting like a couple more dudes and just like a fire team to be like, oh, let's go try to train this stuff. Once you start getting more guys, you're like, all right, well, now I need to start making it a little bit more realistic. And that way too, you can integrate certain things like, okay, these are the OPFOR capabilities for like counter signal, right? So like we the whole trip we used ATAC, so it was funny because at one point I had seen you, Nigel, in one of like the Telegram like gear trades or something, looking for XTS 2500 batteries or something like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh no. I was like, because we were using 2500s, and um, we were doing digital, so we knew that like if you guys were using DMR, you couldn't listen in on us. But I was like, if they have at least one 2500, they can figure out eventually what channel we're on, and then they can monitor.
Because we had
our
2 total.
Yeah,
and we didn't even think about trying to find your freak.
Oh, dude!
But I do remember Saturday morning. I think it was around like 10 in the morning when we hadn't made contact with you guys yet. I hopped in the Discord, tagged you, and said good morning.
Yeah, I ended up seeing it afterward because I had when I got service later on, I saw that and saw the time and just laughed at it. But yeah, I for sure are going to have some sort of counter signal capability, not necessarily counter signal, but where you monitor our thing. So I put it like in our op board, like in the Intel part. I was like, they have videos they can listen to us.
Yeah, and we originally had a guy with an SDR set up as well, but he wasn't able to make it, and he was super excited to use it.
Yeah,
and see if he can't like direction find you guys.
And like another thing too is that
cool.
Yeah, that would have been like per the exercise. It set the thing too is that the weather had changed like literally the day of. Like the weather forecast to be like in the 40s and kind of nice, which for us, like we had specifically chose like that was pretty much the earliest we could do was like very late winter. So that's why I initially chose to do it up in the UP, because it would have been more like I want to do our eval in the winter time, so it's a little bit worse.
Yeah.
So on the way out in the weather, and we're like, oh, it's going to be pretty cold. But we had set for the exercise like a ceiling for the drones. So drones could only go above, they could only go, I think it was like 250 feet above ground level.
Yeah, I remember that.
Up until a certain point, and then they can go up higher. And that was like, because we had figured too that if we were going into the initial staging area that we were going to, there's a pretty decent clearing by it. So we could, if we really wanted to, we could launch one of our drones at night straight up, try to pick out lights or anything, and then bring it back down and know where you guys were at. So we didn't want to do that. And that's kind of one of the things, like playing into the exercise, playing into the game versus playing into the mission, so to speak, is like our objective was to find you guys. Like in real life, I would have done that 100%. Granted, once we got the winds and the rains and everything, we couldn't launch any of our drones. So I'm paperweight for one guy to carry around.
Yeah, that's kind of what we ran into too, because we tried to throw up a drone not too long before we got into our engagement, and the winds were just way too high for us to even get it up. And it was so loud too, with the beeping and like how loud the blades were. We're just like, yeah, there's no way they don't know where we are now.
Yeah, which is funny too, because I would have never known that you guys even tried to do that. Which, it's kind of funny, because I was just saying like it sucks because you learned enough on like training things, but then when we were actually doing like an actual op against you guys, it's like pointing out how just deliberately nasty we could have been, and just nobody would have known. And so it's kind of funny, but granted, if things were different, and if you guys were actually out hunting us and actually had some sort of intel on where we were going to be at, or in real life, if the informant that was giving us all the information ended up giving you guys all the information of where we were going to be at, because you guys were paying him 2 cases of beer versus 1, then so it's
exactly.
It's good to get those kind of like things ingrained into, and that's sort of one of the issues where if guys are like, oh well, at this point I'm going to do this, but I know that in real life I would just not turn on my light or whatever. It's like, well, once you get into the point where you're like, oh, it'll be fine, like that's when it's not fine.
Yeah, I was super impressed with my guys, with how well they treated it with the Op4, how disciplined they tried to be. There are a few times where it's like, hey, turn off that light. It's giving off a huge IR signature, even though you can barely see with the naked eye. And they're like, oh, okay. And then once they knew, they never did it again, because a lot of those guys didn't have night vision, have never used night vision before, so they didn't know.
Yeah, you don't know how like I don't know if you've heard the story. Like I'd said it on here a long time ago about how we were doing a patrol one time at night, and we had seen like a glowing coming off of a trail, and we were standing around it forever. You could only see it under night vision. We were like going schizophrenic, and we looked and we realized that it was a cigarette that some dude had thrown out of a truck. And who knows how long ago he had thrown it out.
Yeah.
And it was enough to where you could see it vision. And then another time too, we went to Kentucky, and we set up a spot. And at this point, this is like right before I had bought my night vision, so I didn't have any at the time. So I was using another dude's when I was on watch at night, and I could swing through the trees, and I couldn't see it with the naked eye. And turned out that it was a campfire from some people that were on like 4-wheelers or whatever. And so the next morning we woke up, it was still dark out, and we left, and we were like, oh yeah, they were actually pretty close. Which is like,
yeah, it's
that was kind of like one of our.
Yeah, and I was very impressed with the site that we had found, because looking at the map, it didn't really like look like anything, but it ended up being a very good spot just from how dense it got kind of around it. But we had good security because it was open on its borders, kind of where you guys came from, so we could see anyone coming from like forever away. And if we needed to get out of there, we could dip down that hill a little bit towards the river if it just scoot out.
Yeah, that was a good spot. There was a lot of good on that spot. But I guess what were some of like the key takeaways that you guys had?
I was just about to ask that too. It's like, what were you guys like, oh, we need to totally work on this?
Yeah, so for a lot of my guys, one is definitely their packing lists. A lot of people, myself included, packed more than we probably needed, at least for my guys, because I brought way more water than I needed, because I expected to be bumping around, getting ambushing and all that. And I think at most I had like a couple sips from my Camelback, and the rest of the time I'm like, I'm too cold, I don't want to think about water, which is a terrible thought, but it's just how I was.
The worst thing to do.
Yeah, it's a terrible idea, but it's just kind of what I did. But on the other hand, some guys didn't bring like proper warming layers, stuff like that, because our one hypothermia case that we had, he was wearing like a t-shirt and then a hoodie and then kind of like a larger camouflage jacket, and that hoodie was just sucking all his body heat out of him. And we were like, oh, it was soaked. And we were like trying to put MRE heaters underneath his like armpits and like warm him up with like stick on like foot warmers and stuff. And it worked for a little bit. And then it's like, we should probably take him to the safety Vic. And that's what we ended up doing. And thankfully he was our only one, because so many of our guys were just cold and miserable. Like some of our guys looked like they've been in the trenches of Verdun for a week.
No, geez.
And it was super nice, because a lot of guys kind of discovered where they should start looking at better warming layers, gloves, and stuff like that. But getting away from the gear side, a lot of my guys definitely went up to me and said that we should practice this a lot more, just because after our first time doing it, they're starting to see their own personal discrepancies in like their security and how they patrol and like how they're crossing danger areas and stuff like that. And it's stuff we've covered, but now that we get into the mindset of there's people hunting us, we're noticing our mistakes more and more and more. And people are kind of self-evaluating themselves. And it's something I noticed as well with myself, even when I was patrolling. You'll catch yourself kind of getting complacent as the day goes on. Like, I haven't seen anything. I feel like I'm not going to see anything. And you start getting relaxed. And at any time, you and your guys could have just popped out of a wood line and just lit us up.
Mm-hmm.
But with that, our infill was really nice. We patrolled in, and then we had gotten roughly about 150 meters away from where we wanted our patrol base to be established. So I had the leaders drop their packs. We went and did a leaders recon. We established where we wanted our security to be at, where we wanted our one entrance to the patrol base to be. We had already had a pre-established challenge and pass, be it challenge and pass word. We had IR flashes planned. We had viz panels planned. We even had like hand and arm signal challenge and pass planned. Went back after our leaders recon, set the guys in, went to go establish that LPOP, realized how dark it was and that the LPOP was just not a good idea, because if anyone tried to even get out there without night vision, they were going to get lost. I think the biggest takeaway a lot of guys got was at night, ensuring that you set up a proper sleeping system depending upon what conditions you're going to be in. Because for those, a shelter would have been probably fine, like a hasty one where you can take it down quickly, or even just a bivy sack. But a lot of guys didn't set up a bivy sack because last they had checked, the weather was going to be fine, and then it started raining on us, and a lot of people woke up soaked. Like even I woke up soaked, and that's just because my bivy sack zipper got stuck and I couldn't figure it out in the dark. So I just kind of suck it up and dealt with it. And then a huge thing for a lot of guys.
Many people. I'll just suck it up and figure it out. Next thing you know, you're getting your fingers.
What was funny is that, what was funny is I didn't even end up putting on a warming layer until like 1, maybe 1:30 in the afternoon the next day, because all I had was a merino wool top, like t-shirt on, and like my true spec BDU top I had. That's all I was running, and I was perfectly fine.
Yeah.
But a lot of guys noticed how like bored they were getting to sitting on security. I'm like, that's what patrol base operations is like. It's going to be very boring until you get into some kind of contact or you leave. And I know a lot of them have talked about the next time we do this. And I remember you brought it up as well before you guys left Saturday night, where if we ever do this again, the play area is definitely going to be a lot smaller. So these guys need to be ready for the next time to get into these ambushes and these more frequent engagements. And some of these guys brought up the concern of, how will I know how many rounds to fire and how to conserve ammunition? And it's like, that's something that needs to be discussed. Like, you don't really. It's kind of something you think about on the spot. Like, you go through the amount of ammo that you need to go through.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
But beyond that, with us kind of just sitting in the patrol base and then kicking out security patrols a lot, it was less of a training thing for my guys and more of just getting the patrol base experience. But for the engagement, the guys that I had grabbed to maneuver got a good look at what maneuvering onto an enemy kind of looks like. And that definitely inspired them to do their own research and inspired future training for us. It probably won't be until later in the summer, just because the way my group does training is we'll have a couple different topics, and sometimes it's patrolling, and we've had meetups where it was just, we're going to have someone's wife teach us how to sew up our uniforms and our gear, followed by doing a quick trauma medicine class and like how to treat basic combat wounds and injuries you'd see in the field, like ankles, and how to set up a hasty litter or something like that. And we've had other meetups where it's like we've just discussed trench warfare and then went and dug an irrigation trench for somebody just to kind of get people's feet muddy. And it's just because my group trains not only a lot of these small unit tactics and whatnot, but they'll cover things like gardening and sewing and stuff like that, and vehicle maintenance, because it's the way we train. It's more of a preparedness group. But not after that event, a lot of people started looking more towards the small unit tactic stuff, which I will probably see a shift here in the next few months as we cover more and more of that kind of stuff, which I'm happy about because that's mostly what I know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely some good takeaways for us. Like, for the water thing, we had, for kind of the main route that we were going with, until, we had to change it kind of on the spot. What our plan was that we were going to go into a spot, and then the way that we had organized the patrols throughout the day was that we were going to have one that went down by the river to check out a spot. So that way we could go and do a water resupply if we needed to. And then once we got to the point where, because I had on my packing list that I had pushed out to everybody, I think that I said that they need to have like a minimum like 2 quarts or like two Nell
Yeah, I
gauges.
think I saw that in your post you threw out on Patreon.
Yeah. So I put out the post for free on like the whole FTX and kind of like from my perspective what we did everything, and I included the packing list that we had on there, which it also breaks it down by roles. So like certain roles had to carry certain so we did that, and then we were going to have a water resupply point if guys needed it. Once it started snowing, that became less of an issue because we were kind of by an open area to where you could go out and gather snow to melt and all that. So we could have had, guys melting and all that. We did like after you guys had left to go set up, we did kind of a quick like medical class just for like how to spot a lot of the cold injuries and guys that drink dirty water and all that stuff, how to kind of spot a lot of the injuries ahead of time. So that way, and granted, like this was only a weekend trip. So he basically said like most of the injuries that you're going to get from drinking bad water or whatever, you're not even going to notice until you're already home.
Yeah.
Unless it's something that's just like devastating. But luckily for us, like being up in the north, we don't really have like viruses in our water, and generally speaking, the water should be fairly clean given how cold it was and everything. So, not too much of an issue there. But as far as like gear wise, one of the main things for me was that I was going to bring my tactical Taylor Malice, and I was like, no, I'll bring a smaller ruck. And then once I packed it out and it was like pretty much full, I was like, like when something gets wet, it's a little bit bulkier, and like when my hands get cold and I'm everything away. So like a poncho, for example, rarely goes back in its stuff sack when it's wet. Like I generally have a dedicated pocket for it on my Malice or an Alice, and I'll put it in there so that way it doesn't like get anything wet. But I ended up bringing this Mystery Ranch Overload, and that's also part of why I decided to sleeping bag that would have, in real life made me not have a good time. So having also having the flexibility, because once I was there, I was like, oh geez, like if somebody falls out or if they're on this movement and we need to divvy up gear, like I literally have no room to put any of their gear in my pack. So having a larger pack like a Malice or something like that, bigger than what you think that you need, that you can cinch down and everything, is nice in case you need to carry like additional gear for whatever reason.
Yeah. I was really thankful that sorry about that.
No.
I'll let you go. I was going to say, I was really thankful I brought out my Philby, just because I had so much stuff in there on top of the water and I had some extra space, but I didn't end up having to carry anyone else's stuff, but I had enough extra warming layers that I had initially thought I was going to need, to where I was passing out like spare gloves. I think I passed out like a watch cap. I had extra like waffle top and stuff like that for people, because I thought I was going to need it, but somehow I was warm enough to where I just didn't. And I think the most I had put on was like an M65 top with the liner on, and I'm like, yeah, this is fine.
Yeah, as far as warming layers go, like we had, before any movement, we didn't put on a warming layer. And then like, because I had brought a day pack, I brought like a Haley flat pack, and I kept a water bladder in there. And then when we did our patrols, I threw a warming layer in there, just like a loft jacket, and then some snacks and stuff, and some spare batteries. Well, I already, per the I generally prefer to keep stuff on my belt line in general, but also because of the whole thing with like team leaders carrying guns. So I pretty much handguns. I pretty much needed to have one on me. So I had like spare batteries and stuff like that in my on my belt. Yeah, I had like my water purification stuff and some emergency survival stuff. I had everybody carry like an emergency survival kit with some of the key components in it. So that was one thing that I did. So then like when we did the patrol, I just threw on the day pack and had everything. So it wasn't, I guess I could have used that if I needed to expand my carrying capacity, but it would have just been on the back. One thing though that was like a huge thing was that for us, I had told the guys to like normally we wear like black headgear for IFF, and then I had everybody wear black tops, whether it was a rain jacket or you know, your normal like BDU top or combat top or whatever. And once we started getting into the whole force on force portion, like the actual assault, that was incredible. Like afterward, that was one thing that everybody was like, yep, that was a good thing. And so when we were like doing our patrols throughout the daytime, it wasn't something to where it would stand out, like, you know, with proper spacing and everything, like going kind of through the trees. It was easy to lose guys and then have to kind of search for them a little bit, like if they're in front of you and then you find them again and all that. And like at one point I have a video on my phone, but at one point I noticed that the guy in front of me, he was wearing like Marpat top and bottom, and then he just had like a black rain jacket on. And because his pants were also wet and stuff, like you can't tell a difference from 20 feet away between his top and his bottom, even though he's wearing like Marpat and then black. Like it's pretty, most woodland patterns darken to be damn near black. So anyway, black itself was like bold enough to where when we were actually doing the force on force thing, like right when we assaulted your guys' camp and nobody was home, the 3 guys that we had that joined us, I told them ahead of time, like, here's what we're doing as far as like uniform goes, but since you guys are not part of our group or anything, I don't, like, you don't have to follow it, right? Like, don't pay to come out and for a weekend. So they came and they just had woodland patterns on. They had viper hoods, they had cami paint, they had everything, you know, that they normally do, and they were like vegged up. And so
I remember seeing them.
Yeah, like, dude, I was, as soon as they got there and we were all like they start like sticking veg in their hoods and like putting cami paint on, I was like, oh geez, these guys are about it.
Yeah.
So like when they were kind of ahead and I was looking, and they were kind of between like where I was and you were at, and I saw them for a second and I like kind of looked and I didn't know if it was them or you guys, because they didn't have that same like uniformity that we have. And I like kind of looked at him for a second, hesitated, and the guy like waved to me, and I realized that it was him. But like I had hesitated because I thought, and I couldn't tell for sure whether if it was, you know, you or him. And if it was one of your guys's, like I would have been dead. So having that, just that black top, it was enough to where it didn't hinder concealment when we needed to, but it really aided in IFF. It was a huge thing. And you know, even talking to you guys afterward, you guys kind of noticed that, and I think that you guys said that you were going to make some changes to how like you do things.
I know I'm currently waiting on some patches and a helmet cover for my airframe. We wanted to do a concept to where it's a standard kind of helmet look, not quite black, but I think we agreed upon Ranger green. I'm like, well, if we're going to do Ranger green, I'm just going to do a full like World War II Normandy like paratrooper get up for my helmet. So like the netting, a little bit of scrim, and then on the sides have Ranger green patches with like white outlines that are easily noticeable from the sides, and then maybe something on the back. And when it all arrives, I think we're going to do some testing, because at the moment now, we don't really have any proper uniformity, especially when it comes to uniforms. And it's something we've discussed in the past. It's just we haven't made a decision quite yet, probably because we just keep putting the discussion, like pushing it to the side for other things. But like during the Force on Force event, we had all my guys were in M81, but then like Woodland was and his guys were in multicam, and I think one of them had AOR2, and then Frontier and the other Canadians, they had like gray and some Ranger green on with, and I think one of them had like multicam. So there was a heavy mix for all of us. So what we ended up doing is using red gaffer's tape on our arm for like an armband. And it was nice at first until you would go out on a security patrol, and as you're coming up to the patrol base, you would just spot a giant red armband in the trees. It's like, oh, maybe this wasn't such a great idea. And by the end of it, I think maybe like 2 or 3 people even had visible red armbands because everyone else had swapped out their tops for something else.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially once you start putting on layers and stuff. I think that because kind of one of the, like, I have a couple like tiers for like uniformity, and one is prioritizing IFF and one is prioritizing concealment. And realistically, like, when I think that's like one of the funniest things is that when people are like real big on like, oh, you can't wear black, like it's going to stand out too much. It's not natural, which, you know, there's tons of naturally black stuff, shadows,
Yeah.
and all that. Is like when, I don't know, it's like there's a couple of like key things, like the same people say like, oh, skill over gears matter, or skill matters over gear. You have to perfectly match your pattern to your environment, and then also like just the fact that most people can't stay still long enough for it to matter is kind of like one of those things where it's like, you know, realistically, when you have, you know, different varying like there's varying types of events that somebody might have to do, as far as like, okay, we're going out in the woods to go, you know, go find and neutralize this occupying force per the scenario. But if you're on like defense, or you're in a town, or you're you know, wherever, like you need to be able to have that flexibility. So that's why we were like, okay, well, we need to have like methods for good IFF, and then if we have something to where we're going on, you know, where we're going to set up like an actual OP and be there in a small team or whatever, you know, concealment can be prioritized over that. Mm-hmm. So just kind of having like varying levels.
And being able to jump between the two is super nice.
And it's easy too, because like, you know, ahead of time we said like, okay, we're just, you know, just run black tops. If you really want to break it down, you could say like, okay, well, you know, if like for us, and even then, like I kind of realized that it would be fine if we just did black tops and then, you know, green bottoms in general for summertime, whether it's, you know, Ranger green or AOR M81 or, you know, any sort of like green base pattern, and then tan in the winter time. And as long as you have that black top, that's kind of like the main thing that matters, because you're not looking at people's pants at that point anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Availability for what people have. But yeah, that was a big takeaway afterward, and all of us like agreed unanimously. Like there was definitely guys that had doubted it, and they thought that it was going to like make them stand out and instantly get killed by everybody in a 40-mile radius. And then after this event, they were like, yeah, that was the move, because especially as like being in like a leadership role, is looking around to try to gauge where people are at, so you can start to, you know, figure out how you want to maneuver things and move and all that stuff. Is like, it's really easy to take a glance and you see where all your guys are at, and you see where, you know, there aren't guys, but you can tell that there's people over there. You're like, all right, well, that's probably the enemy.
Yeah, it's very easy to keep track of your guys when they're wearing something noticeable. But like you said, it can be used against you as well. It just depends on how you're kind of using it. Because like you look at like Brent 0331, and this man will just disappear in the woods wearing like the navy blue digital uniform.
Yeah,
it's like,
exactly.
Okay. It's like it's less of
what he's doing, right? Like he knows how to utilize it to his advantage. And we've had, like, when we first started doing stuff, we were like testing out patterns. Me and one other dude, like he was wearing like multicam, and I was wearing like Ranger green pants and a tiger stripe top. And we went up on the side of this hill, and there was like little foliage, and we just kind of laid down to see who was more noticeable. And the guys that were down at the bottom of the hill that were looking up told me to move like a foot to my left. And I did, and I was just in the shadows better. And they're like, you disappeared, like you are unable to be seen. So, you know, that can even, if somebody's deliberately looking for you and they know where you're at, like you're probably already screwed. So at that point, like it doesn't really matter. But
yeah, there's
I don't know. That's how the nuances everything.
Yeah, there's so many things you could get into on camouflage, and it's all going to end up leading back to, do you know how to actually like utilize your camouflage and like know how to sit in the shadows and not move and actually hide yourself, versus believing like, I live in a super green lush area and I have AOR2 on or multicam tropic. They'll never see me even if I'm just standing here. It's like, you have to know how to utilize it and not pray that having a close camouflage to your environment will just make you invisible.
Well, yeah, and I think too that there's kind of that, like if you think like, okay, I'm not wearing what would be best for hiding, precautions to get better concealment. Like for us, when we were going looking for your area and we heard a vehicle, we didn't know if it was one of your guys' patrols or what, and so we had to quickly like find a spot to the road to where we could still see. And they didn't even see us because they're driving down the road, not deliberately looking for us. But that was kind of the main thing, is like you're looking for a spot knowing that you're not in the thing like min-max for concealment in that particular spot. So, and that can go for anything, like if you're wearing a green pattern and you just happen to be going through an area where it's more dead or whatever, like you're gonna stand out more. So that was a big takeaway. It was just like how important IFF is for when you're actually maneuvering and all that stuff. And then I had mentioned to how quickly we went through ammo, which I still think that 7, 8, 10 mags is adequate. But originally, per the plan, we were going to have each one guy in each team was going to have a bandolier with 5 extra mags on it. But we didn't end up doing that just after everything.
Yeah, because I know our guys, I think at most we had 3 mags a person. And that's just because I bought most of the blanks myself for everybody. And I'm just like, listen, I can buy most of these blanks. I can't buy all the blanks in the world and get them here on time.
Yeah. Which, by the way, I think that we all ordered from the same place. They definitely made a killing off of us for the blanks. I think that you had ordered from them individually, and
I think I ordered.
It was funny too, because I had reached out to Ken from Ammo Man, who's like the kind of one of our newer like ammo sponsors, and I told them what we were doing ahead of time, and they were testing out some stuff with the different BFAs and everything and different types of loads. And so he that if we had ordered blanks through them, they were just going to order it from Atlantic Wall. So just order from them, but then Atlantic Wall just drop ships everything. So it ended up coming down the line from Privy directly. But I had ordered like some Arms Corps and didn't ship within like a couple days. And so I just emailed him and was like, hey, just wondering what's going on. And he basically told me like, hey, yeah, the Arms Corps ones are out of stock. So they're going to send me Privy instead. And the Privy ones were more expensive, and he just sent them no extra charge. And then when they got to me, instead of being the M200, they were the M200A1. So they're like even better. So he definitely bumped it up.
Yeah, that's exactly what they did to us too.
Yeah. So that was good. And we had one guy who had ordered like right around the same time I did. And he got it like the day before we were supposed to go. And then the last guy ordered kind of late, and he got it, the day that he was leaving to come up. So he had to leave work and stop at home for a minute, and they were like arriving as he was getting home.
Oh wow.
So that one's a little bit more understandable because he ordered pretty late. But for everybody else, yeah, like only one guy did have something weird happen, but I don't think that was the norm. But yeah, as far as the BFAs go, we ordered the BFAs like the standard mil spec ones. So ahead of time, I had asked guys who had like A2 birdcage uppers, who had non-A2 birdcage with removable muzzle devices, and then who had pin and weld. And I was like, yeah, if you have pin and weld and it's not an A2 birdcage, you're probably not going to have blanks, so you're just going to be yelling bang. And then for all the guys that had removable non-A2 bird cages, I was going to have them just do like the Hollywood BFAs, where you remove the muzzle device, you put the plug in, then you put the muzzle device back on, which obviously raises other concerns. If you plan on shooting like Sunday morning for real, then we'd have to go through and check everything. And then as far as like the A2, like you could just use the standard. So that's what the difference is between the red and the yellow BFAs. The red one, so there's like a hole in the BFA for proper cycling, and the red ones are for
Yeah,
M16s.
isn't the red one meant for like? Yeah.
Yeah, it's for the M16s, and the yellow ones are for M4s. So they're tuned differently.
Yeah, that's something I didn't know until I started looking into it after someone asked me, and I'm like, I would have never known.
Yeah, no, nobody's ever told me that before. I had to do like a BFA research. But what we ended up doing was there was a guy who made a bunch of these like custom BFAs for Tusk 2, and they were designed to go over like Surefire and like longer suppressor like QD muzzle devices. So we got a couple from him. He's on Instagram, I know, is like WAT, like WAT Dynamic Core. But he said that they were such a hit at Tusk, and then because we got them and other people were asking about it, that he might start doing them full time because he was just going to do like a limited run, and he had enough for like five left over, and he would put like, "Hey, I have 5 of these left over if anyone needs it," and I was like, yeah, "I do." So they were a little bit pricier than the normal BFAs. They were like 65 a piece, but they worked out perfectly.
Yeah, I saw you put that in your post, and I was like, oh, that would have been awesome for like myself, because we ended up using a lot of Hollywood BFAs, and something I noticed that some guys ordered Hollywood BFAs from one place, some ordered them from other places, and some of them were different sizes. Like some of our guys had thicker Hollywood BFAs, but then the 2 I had ordered, the one that was in my rifle worked perfectly, but the other one, when I brought it home to kind of inspect, I had found out that like as I was taking it apart, the center port had fallen out. It had like broken off the BFA. And I was like, that could have been horrifying if that like launched out at something.
Yeah, no kidding. So what he did for us was he went off the Hollywood BFA sizing with the porthole in like the end, and like different barrel lengths because of gassing and dwell time and stuff. So all of us just had 14.5s, and so he just went off of what the Hollywood BFAs are at, and they all function perfectly. I think that the one guy had kind of a weird muzzle device that was pretty short, but yeah, it was pretty good because I was planning on using like a spare upper that I had that had an A2 birdcage on it, and then one devices I just used my normal 14.5, and it was nice too because then like as far as gear went, I wanted to have all team leaders to have some sort of way to, like, whether you have binos or a rangefinder or something like that, to be able to see magnified. And I said, like, it's no big deal. You can just use that. So having the ACOG is once again points to the ACOG for having that built-in like range estimation for using the horizontal ranging lines on somebody's shoulders to see how far they are. So I didn't have to pack one extra thing. Something too that like I think that is kind of important to point out is like and this is kind of like a whole separate topic. This huge trend where people try to like load up as much shit as they can on their it's like a belt kit or like a chest rig or something like that, and they just need to have like the absolute most amount of stuff on there. But for us, like you don't really need all that unless you're supplementing for not being able to fit everything in your pack. But for the most part, like as long as you can get to your pack, as long as you have everything you need to get you between like long haul. So I had like a little bit of water on my rig, and that was nice. And then I had like my map and notebook and stuff like that, and spare battery and spare antenna and some chem lights and miscellaneous stuff like that, gloves, some warming layers, radio, all that.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what I was carrying as well. I think the one thing I probably could have ditched from my chest rig was my Vortex 8x like solo monocular, and I could have ditched that because I have an L-can that has a range estimator on there. It's like I probably don't need this. Like the extra magnification's cool, but at these distances in the woods, I probably don't need this.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was one thing too, is that we had a guy, no call, no show, who he was gonna fill like he has like a Scar heavy with, some decent glass on it and everything. So he was gonna do that, and then but he ended up not showing up. So which, in retrospect, we didn't need any of that glass anyway. Like at one point I actually did use my ACOG when I could see, when we were waiting to do the assault, and I could see like where the truck was at to see if I could see anybody in it. But I didn't. So yeah. Other than that though, like most of the gear takeaways were a lot of like or a lot of the takeaways in general were kind of like a lot of guys' individual stuff, as far as like they know now like that they need to work on their role or whatever. As far as like patrolling formations and stuff, we pretty much just did like ranger files, your normal columns, like Army calls them staggered columns or tactical columns or whatever.
Staggered column.
Yeah, which that's kind of like a funny point, is like I don't know of any time like in a combat scenario where you'd use just like a standard Army column where guys are, like
staggered column.
No, like a normal, like a standard,
like in a straight line.
Yeah,
just
like where you just have two straight lines,
wide.
And dudes are just aligned.
Yeah, like an administrative hike that we would do.
That's the only time I could think of like using one. So it's,
I guess presence patrols and shit, but
yeah,
even
I know
why would you just stagger that boy?
Yeah, because I know my guys used a big mixture of ranger file, staggered column, and I know for a couple of security patrols, my guys used like a wedge.
Yeah,
and then would transition into like an echelon.
Yeah, we didn't do any echelons or anything. We did a wedge or same thing. Yeah, for the most part, it was just like if it opened up, we'd just go into like a column and go through and then close it back up to your ranger file once the terrain got kind of shitty again. Because we didn't really go through like any real open areas where you could warrant like a good wedge.
Yeah, and that's mostly what we did as well. I think my guys only did it just to get the kind of the practice in.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was like, so one thing too that I had an idea of, for if the next time that we do something like this, I think that what my idea, introduce more force on force as far as like more of a focus on like reaction to contact. Because the thing, like for us, this was kind of like a standard sort of like recon mission, right? Like you do the recon, you find where the guys are at, and then you plan and execute a raid. So that was sort of the scenario, like the training, all that stuff. I think that if we were going to do ambush, reaction to contact, Casavac stuff, things like that, one, obviously the play area would be a lot smaller, but two,
I
would think that if you had like 8 points in an area, and you name them, 0.1 through 8 or 8 through whatever, and then you would have where anybody could like set up at, like, basically what I'm thinking of is that you could have these points that are known between both teams, and then you would basically like shuffle, so that way everybody has like different a different order to go through to these points, and there'd have to be some sort of objective or something like that at each of these points, but would line up if you plotted everything correctly and stuff, was that you might have guys going to the same point, and you might have guys crossing paths at the same time where the op 4 is going to be at, and like they'll have their base camp, and I don't know if I'd want to have that be as like part of the points that you need to go to or whatever. But yeah, essentially something like that, to where you just shuffle and so it's these common points that you're just going to in a different order.
Yeah, and it forces more chances for engagement, which
Yeah.
I think is a fantastic idea, and it's definitely something I'd love to do.
Yeah, because I you know, like we said, kind of too, it depends on what you're trying to train. I think that's a big thing that can go for force on force or you know, non-force on force is like, what exactly are you trying to accomplish, right? Like if you go to the range and you say like, I'm going to deliver, you know, handguns, well, automatically you're eliminating rifles. And then it's
Yeah,
like, okay,
exactly.
well, what do you want to train with the handguns, right? Like, do you want to train draw speed? Do you want to train like sight picture, sight alignment, like proper trigger control? Like, what are you trying to train? And then you isolate that, and then you try to work on that, and so on and so forth. So, like with the training, like, yeah, we had a plan for like Casavax, and we were like, okay, if you get ambushed, this is what you're going to do. This is sort of the protocol. This is how we're going to set up Casavax, all that. And then we both have to go back to and all that, but like in general, per the training that we wanted to accomplish drove what the scenario was, and then that drove, you know, obviously the mission and everything, and then the execution of it. Circle, right? Like we wanted to mostly do recon and then a raid, and that was what ended up driving the scenario, and then drove the mission and everything. So it definitely depends.
Yeah,
You know, dude's got to set stuff up to make sense.
Yeah, and for us, we mostly focused on just basic patrol-based operations. It's like, hey, we need to set security, have a cycle, send out security patrols, and our plan was if, because of the scenario, that we weren't supposed to know you guys were there until some kind of visual or physical contact was made. Just keep sending out security patrols, and then once we made that contact, it's like, okay, now we can start sending out reconnaissance patrols, and if they find anything actionable, now we're sending out combat patrols like a raid or a contact patrol, or setting up an ambush on a route we believe they're going to take.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think too that like for you guys, since you had kind of a hodgepodge of guys, like you didn't have one, you know, one unified group that had like already knew what was going on with each other and stuff. Like you had a couple of smaller groups that were all combining into one. I think that stuff like that is kind of good too, because then you start learning a lot of like the patrolling technique and a lot more of like the kind of basic stuff that is needed to start. Like for us, we already had done a decent amount of like patrolling training and all that stuff, and we already knew each other. We already kind of knew how guys work together and all that stuff. So it's like, all right, now we can, you know, throw in a little bit more at everyone. Yeah,
and for us, like first time meeting some of these guys, and a lot of these guys had never even talked to the other people before. Getting those three groups together, between Woodland Warriors guys, Frontier Outlaw and his guys, and my guys, they worked together surprisingly well. It was pretty awesome to see how well they meshed together and just got along. And when you would send them out in mixed groups on patrols or next to each other, it just worked wonderfully. I do remember one of my guys telling me that he set up his security position not far from one of the other group's guys, and anytime he'd kind of like shift his weight a little bit to get more comfortable, he'd immediately get hit with the challenge and pass. He's like, dude, I've been standing here for like the last 30 minutes.
Yeah, no, that's pretty good. Yeah, I think that's like those small things too that you end up picking up where you're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna wear Gore-Tex because it's wet out, and then you're like laying there forever, like Gore-Tex is fucking loud.
Yeah,
knows that I'm here.
It sucks. It sucks working with such small numbers that like there's your footprint and like your effect on another force is so small. So like you really do have to worry about your Gore-Tex making noise or like your pack scratching. But if it was like an infantry platoon, it's like, dude, who fucking cares, man? Like if they show up, like we're just gonna fight. Like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. It reminds me of like the two units I was in. The first one was like, hey, shut up. Like we're only a platoon strength and there's a bunch of Op 4 outside. But then my second unit was, like dudes yelling at each other from vehicles because we're in LAVs and their engines
Yeah.
are running, and it's like, yeah, like nobody outside of 100 meters is gonna hear you because we're in the middle of the desert and these big armored vehicles.
Yeah, and that's the whole context thing too. Like, especially once you have the strength to back it, when you're like a squad sized element in the woods, and the whole time too, like we were under the impression that you guys were gonna have like close to platoon size, or like two squads, like two squads plus. And so like, you know, that came into a big play too, because then it's like, okay, well, already we're outnumbered, say, you know, 2-1. Now, if we lose one guy, now it, like
If you lose one guy, you're
it's
basically
a lot
done.
more noticeable versus a platoon.
I think that's
Yeah.
that's one of the wildest things that you kind of figure out in force on force. That if you have someone adjudicating and can like kill off dudes and be like, dude, just sit on your hands and like don't do anything, like you immediately feel the loss. It's like, oh well, we don't, you know, I had 8 dudes, now I only have 6, and it feels like it really feels like I only have 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, like a larger force, like, oh, I have 25 people I lost to. I'm like, I have 23 people who could help fill that role and spread it amongst the additional 23 people. But like you said, if I have 8 dudes lose 2, like, there's so much I can't do now.
Oh yeah, it's automatically a higher percentage of a loss. And that was even the thing, like, you know, with reading like a lot of the MACV SAW guys, they would go out with like 6-man teams, and it's like you lose one guy and you're already decreasing the amount that you have by, you know, whatever percentage that is. But it's quite a bit, especially compared to conventional infantry, where they would lose a couple guys in an ambush and extract them out of the mission. Like once you lose 2 guys in a 6-man team, like
it's over.
You have to start.
Yeah, you're just.
It's over.
really
You can't.
thinking
You're
about
combat
if you can continue or not.
Yeah, you're just.
You're done.
Yeah, there's nothing to do. Like you're going home. Like you cannot complete this mission.
Yeah. So I think like the main takeaways were just like the importance for doing force on force is like because I've always said that, you know, most of your training can be done dry firing, and then you can go do live fire to kind of confirm your dry fire. And that's kind of how I see force on force is like you can do your dry fire, which is, you know, your normal training, where you just have a notional enemy force, and then your live, so to speak, is you know, actual force on force. And you don't need sims to do it, because just like even if we didn't even have blanks, even if everyone was just yelling bang, it's like you still have.
It's still valuable training.
Yeah, you still have guys out there that are trying to get you, and like you can war game a lot of stuff by like doing it where, you know, if you have a group of 6 guys, just do 2 teams of 3 or whatever, and it's like, okay, well, this is how we're gonna do this. Or, you know, even if you want to work on like LDA crossings, if you can have like 4 guys go sit and watch through an LDA while 8 guys need to cross it, you're really gonna like nail crossing it if you're gonna take contact. Or, you know, obviously like you got to play into the exercise a little bit at that point, or play into the training, because you know that you're about to be ambushed, whereas in real life you probably won't know. But, you know, that's all just part of the training, right? Like, but just the value that's with having somebody who's like, oh, I want to go kill this guy, and you're that guy that they want to kill is
yeah,
and then you have beers afterward.
Yeah, it puts you in this completely different mindset, because now you have to be actually aware of your movements and like how you're going to work through problems, because without that force on force, it's like, oh, I can just do this or this and this, and not really worry if someone's observing me and getting ready to just light me up with a 240 down the trail. But now that you have a force on force, if you're doing an LDA, like even the tiniest mistake, and all of a sudden your entire patrol has been compromised, and you're getting chased out of there by like a fire team reinforced that you didn't see.
Yeah, especially like small things, as far as like, oh, before you go back in the patrol base, like 1 entrance, 1 exit, J-hook through there, and all that stuff. Because, you know, in normal,
counting off guys.
Yeah, exactly. Like counting off guys, because normally like you know that you're out in the woods, nobody's gonna follow you, nobody's gonna do any of this stuff. Even if there's other people out there, they're doing their own thing. They probably don't even know that you're out there. And so now when you have a group of guys that knows that you're out there, it's like the chances of, especially in the snow, right? Like for our example, like, okay, well now tracking is a lot easier. Now it's way more important to at least J-Hook. They walk past the security instead of through the front door.
Yeah, and counting your guys, like Gio just said, reminds me of a story from SOI during the little patrol base week that we did. We had a patrol return, and the guy who's kind of patrolling the entrance didn't count anybody. So like 15 seconds later, here comes another patrol, and they just kind of walk into our patrol base, and his dude's like, "Oh, it just must have been part of the patrol." And I'm sitting there on rest, and I like see the second patrol come in. I'm like, nobody radioed in. And one of them turned to look away from me, and I saw yellow tape on the back of his helmet, so I knew it was the other platoon. I'm like, grabbed my M27, flipped it on full auto, just started dumping blanks at him. I'm like, where did these guys come from? Like, how did they get in?
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, no,
How it goes.
That's how it goes. Stay tuned for next time, and I'll tell you how I wandered into an army patrol base security thing while I was on a land nav course.
These things happen.
It was a good one. But no, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your experiences as well.
Oh yeah, dude,
I was
no
definitely
problem.
more of a listener in this one than a participant.
Yeah, which is funny because you are the Op 4. You are that guy.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's such a huge topic. Like we didn't even get to like observer controllers and like whether they would have been useful for your thing or not.
Oh yeah, that would have been huge.
Yeah.
Or even just like independent recording, so you can see the whole thing from like different angles. Or we didn't get into, kind of like sand tabling the post engagement, just so guys understand, like, hey, look, like, because we can't replicate some of this stuff, like, what are, either talk me through the plan, like post engagement, or, we'll work through it, or we'll recock and work it from that point, sort of thing. There's a lot that goes into it, man. I mean, the whole force on force continuum for for like this type of like generalized small unit training is so broad, and there's so much you can dig into it. I mean, if you had a drone, if it was more open terrain and you could have a drone following, obviously it wouldn't be any of your guys. It would be like a third party flying above you just to kind of see, okay, how is their spacing? Okay, how are they moving? You guys, if you had a talk that was giving your missions, and then, the talk could kind of play off. Both talks could be kind of like present and playing chess against each other versus like you guys are out there actually doing it. Like, there's so much, dude. It's such a broad topic, and it's just dense. And I'd say if anyone has a takeaway from this episode, it's just like, go figure out how you can do force on force. If there's a place where you can get your group and, there's a similar group out there, try it. Even just do scenarios where it's just one Op 4. If you have a 6-man team and 5 of you guys are out there, and you just set one of your guys or get a buddy that isn't part of the group but wants to help, or a probate or whatever, and just be like, hey, man, we just need you to pick a spot. We're going to walk roughly along this path, and like, we need you to ambush us so we can run in a sticks lane on react to contact. And then we're going to throw in some like Casavac or whatever. And, that's a pretty dense lane. And you run that 2 or 3 times, and you'll see like, hey, holy shit, like, there's a lot of stuff that we're missing, and there's a lot of stuff that we're doing okay. So it's all interesting.
I think that probably,
absolutely,
one of the best things that we could have done was had a third party, like you said, who was like just the evaluators to help, kind of coach and be like cadres during the actual, force on force times, and tell people like, all right, you're dead, right? Like they're not playing, they're unbiased, and have them just just be able to take drone footage doing a patrol or tag along on a patrol and just take notes purely of like how everybody's doing and stuff. And then
it's not a sexy job, but it's kind of like you are the not even referee, but you're like the guide.
Yeah.
And like you're in there,
You're the
experiencing it
dungeon
all.
master.
And then yeah, basically. Yeah. No, you are because you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, if you're familiar with like OCs and how they work in the Army, at least at the combat training centers, they 100% will just tell dudes like you and you're dead, and it'll be to either further, either to add another bit of depth to a scenario or to punish, bad decisions or to slow you down because it's, it's just, I'm controlling you and I'm introducing consequences that might not otherwise have happened through miles or through just natural force on force play. Because there's a learning point here, or like you guys are making a big mistake and like you need to be shown that what you're doing is wrong. And I, you see it all the time, dude. Guys going like Rambo and just charging, not even trying to bound or 3 to 5 second rush through like a field. And it's like, all right, you're dead. And that's just how it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And having that third party, it's super nice being able to see where you're like have a third party point out your deficiencies because some people just won't even notice them at all.
You don't know what you don't know, right? So your third party has to be pretty, they have to be on point.
Yeah.
And they have to, even showing up with a clipboard with a checklist of like, did I see this? Did I see this? And then writing down at the bottom some notes is something worth thinking about. It's a lot, dude. I mean, one of these days we should try and find like an OC from one of the combat, someone that's done that billet from any combat training center and just kind of pick their brain. Because I'm sure there's a guide or something out there, but there's a lot. It's a pretty hefty job. I mean, it's like it's an NCO and above job, and I think officers get it too. I think it's like captains and majors can get it, but it's not really like a.
We have like coyotes in the Marine Corps for like 29 Palms and stuff, and they're always like super senior enlisted or like majors and lieutenant colonels and stuff. Like they're like senior guys that know how. But yeah, consequences definitely got to be the worst part about actions.
Mm-hmm.
I hate it when I get bit for playing around with a snake. Just throwing it in the air, hitting it against the wall, and it just swings around and bites me. It's the worst, dude.
It's the well. If it isn't the consequences of my actions.
Nigel, is there a way that if you'd like anybody to reach out to you for anything or anything that you want to?
Yeah, if anyone ever wants to reach out to me, honestly, just DM me on Instagram on my page. Odds are, since I don't really do anything at work, I'll probably respond to it relatively quickly. Nice. At work, I'm usually just kind of sitting there, just staring at a wall.
Your page is Nigel Harmberry.
Yeah, my page is Nigel Harmberry. You'll know it's my page when you see a picture of me with Nigel Thornberry wearing an airframe, staring at you.
Powerful.
But yeah, like I'm pretty open. I'll probably respond relatively quickly because I'm almost never doing anything, and I'm willing to answer any question that you have. And if I don't know it, I'll find someone who does and ask them to get you an answer.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, dude, no problem. It's a pleasure.